Welcome, everyone, to the monthly meeting of the Knoxville, Knox County Planning Commission. I am Tim Hill, Chair of the Planning Commission, and I'll be conducting today's meeting. Assisting me today is the Executive Director of Knoxville, Knox County Planning, Amy Brooks, and the Planning Commission Attorney, Tasha Blakeney. I would like to call this meeting to order. I'll now ask Mr. DeArmond to call the roll.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon. Commissioner Uten.
Here.
Commissioner Boyer. Commissioner Huber.
Here.
Commissioner Scelso.
Here.
Commissioner Perez.
Here.
Commissioner Browning. Commissioner Higgins.
Here.
Commissioner Levinson.
Here.
Commissioner Biggs.
Here.
Commissioner Barger. Commissioner Adams.
Here.
Commissioner Smith. Commissioner Midas.
Here.
Commissioner Overton.
Here.
Commissioner Hill.
Here.
That's 11 present, sir.
Thank you. Participating today are planning commissioners as well as planning staff and various representatives of city and county agencies. The planning commissioners are citizens from the city and county who have been appointed by either the city mayor or county mayor, and we receive no salary and volunteer our time as a service to our community. Now a word about how discussion will take place. After each item is called, I will read the staff's recommendation. On certain items, I'll call on staff to comment. At this time, the applicant may address the commission or defer his or her opening remarks and allow any opposition to speak first. The applicant and those in support of the applicant will be given a total of 5 minutes to speak. I will then ask for other comments from the floor. The opposition will also be given a total of 5 minutes to speak. If either side wishes to have an opportunity for rebuttal, you'll need to reserve time from your allotted 5 minutes. Applicants and citizens who register to participate and are attending the meeting in person will be asked to come to the podium and share their name and address for the record where their item is heard. Those who have registered to speak online do not need to sign in at the podium. If you'd like to speak on an agenda item and have not registered to do so in advance, please raise your hand when the item is read into the record. I'll then indicate when it's time for you to speak, and you can approach the podium at that time. You will be asked to sign in at the podium as well as state your name and address for the record. If the Planning Commission decision on that item is appealed and we need to notify you, we cannot do so without your name and address. The Planning Commission may grant additional time for presentation of information. Speakers should limit their remarks to the facts of the case and should avoid repeating comments that have been previously presented to the Planning Commission. Because of the number of items we have before us, groups in favor or opposed to an item have been asked to appoint a spokesperson to represent them. If you have any items that you would like to make part of the record, please submit those documents to knoxplanning.org/share. Please identify the file number and meeting date in your submittal. I hope all of you have reviewed the agenda package from Planning's website. In addition to the agenda, there's information on the website related to how today's meeting will be conducted, as well as correspondence on individual cases. Many of the items we vote on require further action by City Council or County Commission. For matters that are forwarded to the City Council for final action, the applicant or their representative should be present at the meeting at which the request will be considered. For matters forwarded to County Commission for final action, particularly rezoning requests, the applicant or their representative must be present at the meeting at which the request will be considered, or the case at minimum will be postponed. Applicants will be notified of the meeting date. If you have any questions regarding the meeting date or process, please contact planning staff. Today's meeting will be conducted in order of the agenda. Please stand as you are able as Vice Chair Chris Uten leads us in the invocation and Pledge of Allegiance.
Bow our heads. Our Father, bless this community. Help to ensure the decisions made this afternoon are fair, legal, and in the best interest of the total community. As always, keep us mindful of the needs of others, especially those who are in sorrow, need, sickness, or any other adversity. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next on the agenda are the postponement and withdrawal list. I'll read these separately. Under automatic postponements, we have item 13, Shod Companies. Item 19, Knoxville Multi-Use Stadium Development. Item 24, Jenkins Builders. Item 25, Fred Trainer. Item 32, Bodazat Property, Millertown Pike. Item 38, Justin Satterfield. Item 46, Knoxville, Knox County Planning. Those are 30-day automatic postponements. Under 30-day postponements, we have item 33, Lantern Park. Item 45, Knoxville, Knox County Planning. Are there any other requests to postpone any item?
I'd like to make a motion, we approve the,
There's a gentleman standing.
oops.
Bear with us just a moment. We have it.
That's on consent.
This is the project that's on consent right now. They'd like to remove it from the consent agenda item and postpone it for 30 days.
Okay. Okay. Any others?
Chairman Hill?
Sure.
Was item 44 read off? Was it supposed to be?
No, I didn't read item 44.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got the request for item 34. Vice Chair, did you want to proceed?
Sure, Chair. I'd like to make a motion that we approve the postponement list as read with the inclusion of item number 34 off the consent list.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chair Uten, seconded by, was that Commissioner Perez? Okay. Seeing no lights, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. We'll move on to 60-day postponements. Item 18, Katie Wozik, Batson Himes, Norvell and Poe. Item 44, Knoxville, Knox County Planning. Chair will entertain a motion.
I'd like to make a motion, we postpone 60 days as read.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Vice Chair Uten, seconded by Commissioner Perez. All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. On to withdrawals. Under withdrawal list, item 27, Heather Kaiser, Focus Ministries. Item 29, Mission Hills.
Motion to withdraw as read.
Second.
We have a motion by Vice Chair Uten, seconded by Commissioner Perez. All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. We have no tablings. We have one item to be removed from the table, which is item 7, Dale Akins.
Make a motion to remove that from the table.
We have a motion by Vice Chair Uten, seconded by Commissioner Perez. All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Next on the agenda is the consent list, which is composed of items marked with a C. These items are considered non-controversial and are voted on all at once in order to save time. Items are listed in order they appear on the agenda. Please listen carefully. Once an item is approved as part of the consent list, there will be no further discussion on it. And I will repeat, once an item is approved as part of the consent list, there will be no further discussion on it. Item 2, approval of December 14, 2023 agenda. Item 3, approval of November 9, 2023 minutes. Item 8, City of Knoxville. Item 9, George Rodenbush. Item 10, Cherokee Country Club. Item 11, Knoxville Community Development Corporation. Item 12, Knoxville Community Development Corporation. Item 14, Erica Ayala Munoz. Item 15, Peak Hill at Westview. Item 17, Nelson Talent Revised. Item 20, Knoxville, Knox County Planning Commission. Item 21, Jim Snowden, Knox County Engineering and Public Works. Item 23, Dennis Valton. Item 28, Tanya Burris. Item 30, Zero Oak Ridge Highway. Item 31, Fretz Road Development. Item 34, Bradley Lake Lane, we've taken that one. Okay, 34 was postponed. Item 35, David L. Turner Sr. Item 36, Bronzy Harris. Item 37, Igor Shaban. Item 39, Tom Gass. Item 40, final plat of Carter Ridge, Phase 5, lots 248 to 269, and lots 311 to 321. Item 41, final plat of Belltown, Phase 1, Unit 2. Item 42, final plat of The Haven at Hardin Valley, Phase 1A, formerly known as the Ridges of Hardin Valley, Phase 1A. Item 43, final plat of Chapman Trace. Do we have any recusals?
Yes, I recuse from consent.
All right, we have Vice Chair Uten that will be recusing on the consent list vote. Are there any requests to remove any consent items? Okay. Chair will entertain a motion.
Motion to approve consent list as read.
All right, we have a motion by Commissioner Perez, second by Commissioner Higgins. All in favor say aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. First item on the agenda is item number 5. This item has been before us previously and postponed for further study in October. Staff recommendation is to approve the amendments to Knoxville City Code Appendix B, zoning code as presented in the packet. We have a number of people signed up to speak before us and to speak before and against this item. I would like to propose that we limit remarks to 2 minutes per person. I think we have 12 people signed up, if the commission is agreeable to that. And then is the applicant present? Ms. Ball, would you like to? And do we have opposition? We do. We have, seeing opposition, would you like to proceed or defer?
Defer.
Okay, thank you. All right, get to the list here. All right, okay, yeah, all right. Mr. Bob Wetzel. Okay.
Bob Wetzel, 1015 Luttrell Street, 4th and Gill neighborhood. First of all, I want to thank you all, as I did last time, for serving. Y'all give a lot of time down here, and probably the most contentious, hottest seats in Knoxville when it comes to property and things along those lines. So thank you for your service, and thank you for the 60-day delay from the last meeting. We appreciate that. There has been some conversations over the last 60 days. I kind of find it ironic and a little disappointment that the changes the city has proposed have nothing to do with comments made, I heard at any of the community meetings I was at. The fact that they've said, we want more properties eligible, we want less land we want less lot requirements for fourplexes and reduced parking requirements, all seem to move towards favoring more development, which is, of course, the intent of the ordinance. I understand that. I understand there's some need out there as well. I do find it ironic that none of the things that came up at the meetings that I mentioned from neighborhood sides are reflected at this point in time. As I've said before, this proposal has a whole lot of risk for neighborhoods, very few upsides for them, and very little upside for the city, though there is a chance there'll be some more houses, duplexes, fourplexes built out there. The great risk in our historic districts, which I live, will be conversions of these properties. You're going to take a lot of R2 properties and effectively make them R4 properties. You don't change the map, but you change the wording underneath the map, and so R2 becomes R4, and you make those neighborhoods essentially R4. Same thing happens in all the other neighborhoods in the city that are affected by this, but the great issue there is going to be demolition. People will be taking down older houses, neighborhood character building houses, and with the ability to, because the amount of density they'll be able to put on those properties will be significant. Let me remind you that the neighborhoods involved are Lonsdale, Beaumont, Mechanicsville, Oakwood, Lincoln Park, Old North Knoxville, 4th and Gill, Edgewood Park, Belmars, Park Ridge, Park City, Morningside, Linden Avenue, and most of East Knoxville from the stadium out to Burlington. These are communities that have worked hard over the last 50 years to stabilize themselves, and it seems well, it seems very odd to me that we're deciding to put these communities under more tension and more risk. So I would ask that you all would defeat this today and not send it to City Council. I have very little hope that will happen, but that is my ask today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wessel. Ms. Deb Thomas.
My name is Deborah Thomas, and I live in Oakwood. I'd like to read something from the planning site's website. Zoning protects the rights of property owners while promoting the general welfare of the community. It is your obligation to protect workforce housing, which is in short supply. I was neutral for missing middle because I support the concept. But we already have mixed use with apartments and duplexes, but very little parking in the neighborhood before autos were built. I'm speaking against this zoning change because of the unintended consequences. What's missing in the missing middle housing is the disappearing middle class and affordability. Wait TV just had an episode on Monday that showed that this was about affordability, and it's not. Since we last met, there's been additional loss of affordable housing in Oakwood, even though proponents of this measure say demolition won't be a problem. 9 or more single-wide trailers were demolished, and a single-family home will be demolished to make room for multiple townhouses on Oldham Avenue. Please see my email for pictures of this. It's just 2 pages of pictures. So without demolition protection and what essentially becomes RN4 zoning, our area is in danger of losing even more workforce housing. Anyone with a few $100,000s to invest could buy up several distressed houses on a block and profit by this new zoning change. This will displace low-income families, particularly near Central Street, where houses are more careworn. The out-of-town LLC that invested in Oldham Avenue spent over $600,000 for a commercial property fronting Central. They also own another property across the street. This is a zoning change which neighbors already ejected during recode. There were no signs for a zoning change, no openness, no accountability. Please vote no on this item or exclude the lower income neighborhoods without demolition protection like Oakwood and Lonsdale. If you don't, it's just a modern form of urban renewal removal. I'm against this for my neighborhood of over 25 years, which is experiencing intense gentrification. We've lost over 20 structures in the past decade, which were affordable, to be replaced by structures that cost over $300,000. I thank you for your time, and I thank you for your service. Please
Thank you,
vote
Ms.
no.
Thomas. Gordon Coker.
Gordon Coker, live at 1000 Eleanor Street. Glasses, this is the age of diminishing returns. I want to thank the Planning Commission, the City of Knoxville, for pursuing options for increased housing. I'd hope that this proposal will give small developers, especially minority-owned developers, an opportunity to develop vacant lots along the main corridors. And I also applaud the design guidelines so that these structures will blend in with existing. But I do have some concerns. The proposed development of vacant lots and conversion of existing houses to multifamily will invite outside neighborhoods with bigger money to come into our neighborhoods. This proposal will also open the door for demolition of existing houses, which would kind of go against the policy of sustainability that the city has been a staple for the last 4 administrations. The conversion aspect is most disturbing to me. The conversion of existing single-family homes into duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes can destroy the fabric of neighborhoods by creating a more transient community. These converted homes, as we've seen in the past, are often owned by and operated by absentee landlords. Our neighborhoods already have a mix of multifamily and single-family as it exists. Adding more density invites the risk of upsetting the balance between single-family housing and multifamily housing. And I speak to all this from living in my neighborhood for 40 years. I've kind of seen it. I've seen investors come in, and I know the implications of that. So after meeting with city officials at a recent neighborhood meeting, no data was given outlining the success of missing middle housing in other cities. It's kind of appalling to me. It seems like that would be the first thing you would look at is the data. So, so what is the measure of success? Success can't be measured just by increasing density. The long-term impact on neighborhoods has to be taken into account. So this proposal is based on trust. The question remains, how does this proposal benefit our neighborhoods? Or does this benefit developers more than communities? A strong community does not come from forced development of new structures in our existing neighborhoods. Strong communities are built by the people who live there. I again ask that this proposal be modified and limited to the main corridors and not in the neighborhood themselves.
Mr. Coker, if you could wrap up, please.
At the minimum, the conversion aspect of this proposal should be removed.
Thank you. Dustin Durham. I'm sorry. Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm speaking in favor.
Ms. Ball, would you like to speak?
Cheryl Ball, I'm Chief Policy Officer for the City of Knoxville. I think you all already know that. Thank you for the time that you spent on this initiative. Our team, which includes both city and planning staff, has been diligent about including Planning Commission and City Council throughout the work on missing middle housing. As a quick recap, there was a workshop for this body in the fall of 2022 when the study was completed by Opticos. A workshop for City Council followed in March on the study, and another workshop was held in September for City Council on the proposed changes. An additional workshop was held for Planning Commission a few weeks ago in November. You have taken the time to dive in and learn the details of this proposal, and I appreciate you taking the time to do that. Since this body met in October, we've continued our outreach to many neighborhoods, various groups and organizations, and interested individuals. You've seen the specific details in the memo provided on the planning site. We began working with the University of Tennessee College of Architecture and Design back in the summer. I want to thank Professors Tricia Stuth and Ted Shelton and their students for their collaboration with our team. The students attended public meetings like this one, workshops and open house events. They looked at our zoning proposal, applied the proposed changes to specific properties, and created architectural models. It's been a great collaboration, providing students with a snapshot of the behind-the-scenes work that goes into this type of zoning change, and it has provided our team with invaluable insights into our proposal. As you know, middle housing is house-scale buildings with multiple units in neighborhoods that are walkable, bikeable, and have access to transit and neighborhood servicing businesses. The goal of this middle housing proposal is to change zoning code to allow the development of more diverse housing options for the residents of Knoxville. The continued engagement with our community has helped inform this plan at all stages. The most recent version in front of you reflects a few additional tweaks, including the addition of RN1 in the TDR geography, adjustments to the administrative variations, and generally clarifying language. This plan will significantly reduce the barriers to the development of middle housing types in the traditional neighborhood residential area. Again, I appreciate the time you've spent on this topic, and I will be available for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Ball. Mr. Dustin Durham, sorry that I called you out of order here.
Okay. I am extremely excited at the potential of community progress and public good that this plan brings. Is it perfect? No. There are a few things I'd change. Primarily, and I say this as both an Old North neighbor and as a KTA commissioner, I wouldn't demand off-street parking in a part of our city where most lots are within a half mile of transit. Demanding parking is bad for transit and bad for housing. But as they say, let's not make the ideal the enemy of the good. This plan is good, and it will create a better Knoxville. It won't provide us all the new units we need to catch up, but it will create the needed conditions to allow locals to develop their lots in ways that have been historically allowed in these neighborhoods. This plan respects the overwhelming majority of millennials and Gen Zers, those of us under 45, that view homes like duplexes, townhouses, and fourplexes as equal in value and desire as a single-family house. This plan provides more freedom for locals to build homes for a variety of preferences and gives both renters like myself and owners more choices in the types of places they call home. And it does this by providing mechanisms to protect the architectural character of these neighborhoods while helping to restore the true character of these neighborhoods, which is affordable and inclusive. We must fight for more housing beyond this plan, but we cannot say we're fighting at all if we don't pass this plan. There's been outreach, neighbors have been spoken to, the comments section on this case file shows it clearly. The overwhelming majority of people, including those of us in these areas, want this, and we want it now. This is an urgent time for housing, and we can no longer delay. Homeowners and renters alike need more units built, and we cannot provide housing fast enough if we only continue to build single-family homes. This plan is the first step in combating our housing crisis. Vote yes.
Thank you, Mr. Durham. Cameron Bolin.
I'm Cameron Bolin, 913 Maynard Avenue in Lincoln Park. My name is Cameron. I'm an architect in Knoxville, Tennessee, as well as a resident of 8 years in the Lincoln Park neighborhood in North Knoxville. I'm speaking in support of the proposed missing middle housing policy, specifically to the increased density it supports. I believe that along with this needed zoning reform allowing for contextual house scale density models, this policy is a major step towards advocating for and advancing sustainable growth plans in our communities. Minimizing sprawl and supporting density near our urban core inherently decreases housing infrastructure, energy demand, and carbon emissions, uses less materials and resources, and sustains preservation of and access to unused lands. Additionally, it is our charge as architects and you as policy, zoning, and building code decision makers to progress the platform for code-mandated, highly energy-efficient, resilient, and healthy buildings to mitigate what would otherwise leave homeowners and occupants vulnerable to rising energy maintenance costs and the greater effects of our increasing changing climate. Furthermore, as a homeowner in our city that will live through these changes as they progress, I believe for this proposal to be successful, specifically regarding the potential increase of rentable units, it is imperative to clearly require continual landlord and property investment and discourage the unwanted detriment of these properties due to absentee landlord situations, which is evident today in some of our neighborhoods. Additionally, speaking to the greater discussion of parking, this isn't just a missing middle issue, this is a citywide issue that must be solved in ambitious and inventive ways. If we envision a city that isn't dependent on surface lots, garages, and neighborhoods with cars often parked in the front yard, we must champion bolstering Knoxville mass transit options and availability, thus lessening the dependency on the singular vehicle model. To solve the housing crisis, we must do things differently, including implementing measures like missing middle housing policy. But this also presents an opportunity to adequately respond to other pertinent issues, including quality of life, transportation options, and the global climate crisis. Knoxville can and should be the example city that takes proven steps forward in maintaining a sense of place and community while addressing the housing crisis via a framework that values a low-carbon, equitable, resilient, and healthy built environment for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boland. Christina Bowler.
Christina Bowler, 302 Douglas Avenue. I'm here to support this application as both a practicing architect and current homeowner in Mechanicsville, which is one of the neighborhoods affected by this proposal. I believe this proposal will help restore the traditional neighborhood character of Knoxville's oldest neighborhoods, which historically featured housing diversity, walkability, and streetcar transit oriented toward the working class. Although I was disappointed that the proposal didn't advance at the last meeting, I believe the revisions made in the last 2 months have resulted in a much more compelling proposal. There's so much work to do to make middle housing types accessible to more lots throughout our city, but I believe this proposal is a strong start toward that goal, and I urge you all to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Drew Harper.
I'm Drew Harper. I live at 4318 Washington Pike, number 101. I am also speaking in support of this proposal. I'm the vice president of Yes Knoxville. I own property in Old North and Washington Pike, so some areas will be affected by this. And I'm going to just briefly echo the comments that I left online, which were that this proposal is a small step toward addressing a various number of problems, including climate change. We know that denser areas are better for the climate, lower carbon emissions, more alternatives to driving. Mental health. I was a mental health counselor for 8 years. We know that we're in a loneliness crisis, right? And that walkable communities where you can borrow sugar from your neighbors, which is what I have in Old North. Those types of communities, which we do not have very many of at all, are better for mental health. Also physical health. You know that we live in the second most obese country in the world. We have an obesity crisis. We have a cardiovascular disease crisis where we know that walking and being able to walk to a destination, to a park, not just walking for leisure, is better for physical health and also housing affordability. We know we know that increased housing supply decreases costs, maybe not as much as we would like, but it does affect housing costs. Average rent in Knoxville right now is over $1,500. I've never paid that much in rent or a mortgage, but that's because I was lucky enough to buy property probably around the same time that most of you bought property. But I have friends that are recently moved here or recently at a stage of their life where they want to settle down or own, and their incomes are less than ours and their costs are more. Also, housing diversity. This allows for more diverse options. I heard an opponent say this would increase transients. I say that's a good thing. If your kids move out, if you graduate, if you're older and you want to downsize, there's a lot of reasons not to be stuck in one place. Knoxville has a lot of that. I love Knoxville. I want more people to be able to have the opportunities that I had when I moved here. And this plan is a small step in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harper. Terry O'Meara.
So as a person who currently lives in a non-owner occupied subdivided historic home, and for zoning purposes, this is a little RN4 island in the middle of an RN2. Oh, my address is 1405 Armstrong Avenue.
Thank you.
The need for a larger supply of safe, affordable housing in neighborhoods across Knoxville is clear. While I love the charm, character, and walkability of our historic neighborhood, due to the housing shortage, our landlord has felt empowered to hike our rent by nearly 50% overnight and ignore service requests pertaining to our health and safety. Had it not been for the friendships I developed with my neighbors, I would have moved long ago. I'm now in the process of building a new home in Knoxville and happy that Recode Knox allowed me to include an ADU that can short-term provide a safe, affordable rental space in a walkable neighborhood and help pay my mortgage as I am a single-income household. Eventually, since the ADU is universally designed, it will accommodate my aging parents. While it may have at times been challenging to meet the planning requirements, follow conservation overlay guidelines, and include an ADU, I feel it has been worth the additional effort and planning. I fully understand that one additional unit will not solve all our housing issues, but I hope that it can be an example for what can be accomplished in the future if zoning laws are changed to facilitate missing middle housing development. No legislation is ever perfect, but taking incremental steps to provide safer and more affordable housing for people in walkable zones, in my opinion, is moving in the right direction. And also, based on the comments, I feel that I need to mention about how I have contributed to my community, not as a homeowner, but as a renter. Although I may not own my home, I have cultivated friendships with my neighbors beyond a friendly hello as we pass. I've attended birthdays, dinner parties, and baby showers. I check on my neighbors when they're unwell. I've watched dogs, houses, and plants while people are on vacation and lent a helping hand when needed. I may not own my home, but I am part of my neighborhood. I feel that the addition of more missing middle housing can provide that sense of community and belonging to others regardless of their property ownership and help ease financial pressures on renters caused by the mismatch in housing supply and demand. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Randy Gennard.
Randy Gennard, 5408 Fountain Gate Drive, Knoxville, 37918. Builder and developer in Knoxville. I have on the agenda for in January a pocket neighborhood, and it's at 1717 Loves Creek. I just wanted to give an example. Right now, we can put 48 units on that property. If this zoning passes, which I'm much in favor of, with the parking, the smaller units, the smaller lots, if we go with the 18-foot wide, we can put 78 units in there. That's an increase of 38 units. This piece of property is bounded by 640 Buffett Mill and Level Road. I mean, Loves Creek. I'd like it to be Level Road. But it's just out of the zone, I think, that you're looking at. But I would like to put forward also that if we address a 16-foot wide module, if you're using modular construction, which we have used, it's very hard to get a permit for 18-foot wide modules. So if we use a 16-foot wide module on our center units on townhouses, that would also increase this to 85 units. I just wanted to give that example and say that I'm much in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gennard. Caroline Cooley.
Hello, I'm Caroline Cooley. My address is 903 Wingate Street, Knoxville. I have resided in Knoxville for over 40 years and, in fact, lived in the same house for all of that time. And though it is an RN1 neighborhood, it truly is not an RN1 neighborhood because there are many small single-family lots with housing. There are apartments and even retail in our neighborhood. But nonetheless, it's a very, very popular place for people to live. And I think so it shows that there's neighborhood character, that there are different types of people in the neighborhood, and that are much more socially connected. The amendments allow for young people, especially, to find housing in neighborhoods where they feel comfortable walking in their neighborhood and feel socially connected. It also allows for seniors who want to downsize but don't want to leave their neighborhood. They want to move into a smaller house or apartment or even a small townhouse in their neighborhood where they can walk, and especially if they're not able to drive, that they can live close to someplace with transit that they can get to their doctor and to the store and so forth. So as Bike Walk Knoxville, we support this amendment to the zoning code. We feel that it's going to be very beneficial as far as creating some more density to the neighborhoods, and with lots of different types of housing that are going to follow the regulations of the amendment and allow people with different needs as far as their transportation, their family situation to be in these neighborhoods. Bike Walks Knoxville supports the City of Knoxville Vision Zero action plan to eliminate traffic fatalities and serious injuries on our streets. These zoning amendments that allow more variety of housing types in walkable and transit accessible neighborhoods aligns with the Vision Zero goal to build places where people can get where they want to go safely without a car. And thank you for your hard work on all this, everyone involved in it, and we just want again to support the amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cooley. Zoe Scott.
Hello, Zoe Scott, 4013 Heather Court. My name is Zoe Scott, and I am the Advocacy Director for Bike Walk Knoxville. And without repeating anything that my fellow supporters have said today, I do want to reiterate that the missing middle housing proposal supports the type of communities that will allow people to walk with their kids to school or ride their bike to pick up groceries, make any of those types of daily trips outside of a car that we know we need more of in our community, because that has a host of benefits, everything from public health to community safety to benefiting the local economy, the types of things that we want to see more of in and around Knoxville. But I'm also here as a resident of Knoxville. I have not lived here my whole life, but in the few years that I have called Knoxville home, I have loved getting to know these people and this place, and it has been my honor and privilege to serve this community through my work with Bike Walk Knoxville, my service with CAC AmeriCorps, and through volunteering with a host of other organizations. And with that in mind, I am personally really proud to support the missing middle housing proposal, because I think it serves the type of people who want to come and call Knoxville home. It serves not only our current residents, but also all of the people who want to move here, who want to live in this type of place, who are, like me, anxiously searching for a type of housing that fits not only their budget, but also their lifestyle. And I encourage you to pass this proposal to help serve all residents of Knoxville. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Mr. Bentley Marlowe.
Hi, Bentley Marlowe, 322 Douglas Avenue, 37921. Obviously, I'm in support of this. It's like others have said, it's not perfect, but it's a good place to start. I hope that we will continue to revise this. I would urge that we think about eliminating the parking requirement. That's an incredibly challenging factor when trying to build on these older lots in the TDR area, and I don't think it's necessary, like a commissioner just said, cats within a half a mile of almost every one of these parcels. So I'd urge you to think about maybe removing that, but otherwise, I think this is a good first start, and I hope you all will vote in the affirmative. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marlowe. Hanson Sale.
Hanson Sale, 205 East Oklahoma Avenue. I'm here on behalf of East Tennessee Realtors Association, as well as a resident and homeowner in the TDR area, to speak in support of these amendments. The housing crisis is real. Home prices in Knoxville have increased nearly 85% since 2019, meaning a home valued at $250,000 in 2019 is now worth an average of $462,000. It's a crisis that touches the lives of our friends, our families, our neighbors, those who keep our community safe, teach our children, respond to our medical emergencies. And the data bears out that is the demographic who's worstly impacted. According to our research, the starting salary that's posted on the city's website for a KPD officer is enough to afford 2% of the homes listed for sale in Knox County. I, like most of you, believe Knoxville should be a community where people of all backgrounds can seek and achieve a better life for themselves. To achieve that goal, we have to grapple with the reality of working class families being shut out of the most desirable, prosperous neighborhoods in our city because in those places we prohibit or obstruct the construction of the type of homes that less advantaged families can afford. I also want to touch on why our association continues to advocate for the removal of parking requirements, and I'm going to read from the Missing Middle book. Requiring off-street parking has the biggest impact on small lot residential infill. When you analyze neighborhoods platted before the 1940s, the lots are typically 25 to 50 feet wide and the depths vary, but generally between 100 and 150 feet. For lots of this size, even if the development standards are intended to deliver missing middle scale infill, the space needed to fit off-street parking on the site typically makes it physically impossible to provide the required parking, end quote. We are advocating not because we dislike cars, but because this is a really important issue in making missing middle possible. And I would also just say most of these neighborhoods were built before we had parking requirements. So in a very odd way, taking the parking requirements out is a way to both honor the character of our neighborhoods and address our housing needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sale. That wraps up everyone. Okay, all right. So we'll go to commission. Okay, Ms. Crockett, we heard a number of folks comment on parking as being a concern. In your all's testing, how did you view that?
So to provide some context, our staff, just in order to make sure that the proposed dimensional standards technically work, our staff tested the minimum lot widths, an average lot depth, the required parking spaces, and the maximum building footprint, just to make sure that the standards that we're putting forth actually work on lots. So this process initially identified a few necessary changes to the parking standards. We included a specific standard to allow triplexes and floorplexes to back into an alley if there is one. Townhouses already could, so we added those in there. What we found in general in looking at how these site plans worked out is that parking creates more impervious surface. So there's fewer space for trees, fewer space for residents' yards to enjoy. And then more specifically, we found several specific incidences where building the maximum footprint, so that's the building width and depth that are laid out in the dimensional standards, it would be challenging alongside accommodating those full number of parking spaces. So that's a fourplex on a 55-foot or a 50-foot wide lot and a multiplex. So ultimately, this would require the building's footprints to be reduced and the unit size to be reduced, which could make things less cost-effective for the builder and property owner and more challenging for the people that live inside it. So overall, I'd say the parking requirements affect both the buildings and the sites themselves.
Thank you for your comments. Commissioner Shelso.
So I went to the architecture school's open house on Emery Place. I don't know if anyone else saw that, but the models that they made of what could happen was really pretty inspiring. Of course, they're architects, so they make really cool things when there's not a developer wanting to necessarily build it. But it was great to have a lot of conversations with those students and with a couple of them and asking what they thought of the proposal, and then kind of leading to, what are their plans after graduation. There were several of them that it was very disheartening to hear them say that they don't think they can stay in Knoxville. And to think that our neighborhoods might change by having more people in them in a negative way, I think is really pessimistic, because there are a lot of younger people that would like to stay here, like the architecture students, that I think would be a great addition to our neighborhoods. And allowing more developments like these to increase the housing supply in neighborhoods that traditionally can support more density, that's what we're looking at. I don't need to reiterate all of the really good comments that the supporters had here. in terms of the parking, when we were meeting Tuesday to kind of go over that, the maximum recommendation that Opticos recommended is 1 per unit, which is what this proposal currently has in it. And the justification was, well, previously it was 2. So I think maybe 2 was too high. So starting too high and cutting it in half still maybe leaves you too high. So I would like to make the motion to approve the ordinance with an amendment to remove parking requirements within a quarter mile of a transit route and reduce the requirement to 0.7 spots per unit everywhere else. I think that would be a good way to start out this policy, this ordinance, to kind of, see how that works too. So I've got copies that I've written up for everyone to look at, but it's still pretty straightforward. So no off-street parking vehicle is required within 1/4 of a mile of a transit route, and then off-street vehicle parking, each dwelling unit requires 0.7 spaces. I think there's a lot of benefits, as we've talked about, in terms of being able to build the projects with a little bit less parking. 0.7 was a number that I came up with that was basically came from the ordinance as drafted, where if you were within a quarter mile, you get a 30% reduction. So instead of 1, it's 0.7, 30% less. So that still requires parking if you're outside of that quarter mile. And that is my motion, to approve with this amendment.
Second. Okay, so we've got a motion to approve as defined in this exhibit that was submitted by Commissioner Shelso. And was it Commissioner Levinson that seconded it? Is that right? Yes, Commissioner Levinson seconded it. And Commissioner Higgins.
Thank you. I also I agree with everything Commissioner Shelso said. And I would like to add a couple other very specific wording changes, if possible, if Commissioner Shelso wouldn't mind to amend his motion if he agrees with this. And what I'm seeing specifically is looking at practical implication of these requirements and trying to maintain some broad allowances for contextual design. So it's specifically, I have 2 comments about the setbacks that I think we should alter to get really specific. If anyone has it open under 4.6C, and then number should be, I think, page 38 on the document. Number 3 of that says front setbacks for middle housing types shall be the average of block face plus or minus 5 feet, in no case less than 10 feet. There are instances where you see front setbacks in 4th and Gill that are less than 10 feet. And I kind of hate the idea of having to break away from that context. So it's very common in our zoning language with setbacks to say a number plus or minus or the average, and then whichever is less. So my modification to that, amendment modification would be to say 10 feet or plus or minus 5 feet of the average of block face, whichever is less. That's a very minor change. And then also, if you go on down to section 4.6G, where it talks about the administrative variations, I would just include all, for number 2, I would include all setbacks, not just corner side setbacks, just because when you start trying to design for individual lots in these, excuse me, there are instances where it may make more sense to go a couple feet one direction, a couple feet inset from the other direction. So I think just allowing staff to have that ability to review those items if there's a good reason for it makes sense. So just including not just corner side setbacks, but all setbacks on that. So those are my two things. And apart from that, I agree with the supporters, and I think that this will be really good for our city. And I appreciate that so many of the people who spoke in favor are members of these neighborhoods and are also involved in the city in multiple ways. I think we heard from a CAT board member, design review board member, and a BZA board member, and probably a few others. So I think that's really encouraging to hear. Thanks.
You want to respond to that, Commissioner Shelso?
Could you repeat the front setback?
Yeah. Change that to just say 10 feet or plus or minus 5 feet of the average of block face, whichever is less. So it's still a 10-foot minimum, but if the average block face is 4 feet, then you could go 4 feet.
I think it would be good to hear staff maybe weigh in on what they think of that, or if there could be another way to accommodate that, such as going to 4.6G administrative variations, increasing if you made it all setbacks and just made the variance power 50%, that would theoretically get you 5 feet off of a 10-foot requirement. That could be another option, right? Of what you're trying to get at.
Yes, that could. I think if there's a situation where the setback the front setback says in no case less than 10 feet. So there are some areas near the corridors where setbacks are closer than 5 feet. So I think that would work if that's a more simple solution, though.
Sorry, your purpose here is to just try and contain the character of the neighborhood so that you don't have a developer coming in and having to meet these guidelines when actually, if they were really wanting to fit, they would be slightly different.
Right, yeah.
So is it possible that some sentence of that nature is articulated so that it's clear the purpose of this variance, if you will, is to make sure that the developer has the opportunity to be consistent with the neighborhood? And it seems like if that was said, and then there's an equation included, that would help clarify things for the future.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. And I think that could be done with the administrative variations and just including that the intent there is for contextual design allowances. So, okay.
Yeah, I can try to weigh in. I appreciate Commissioner Shelso mentioning the administrative variations, because that's what I was going to ask the question is, could we just address it there versus tweaking the language in the section you identified? So It sounds like that would be an acceptable. Mm-hmm. Okay. Anybody else would like to weigh in? Okay.
All right, Commissioner Smith?
And this is a question more for, I guess I should know this, and I apologize. Going back to number 2 of Commissioner Celso's point, is the distance calculated from like the closest point of the property line to the next transit line, or is it based on the walkability route? And the reason I ask that, thinking about the property on Loves Creek, based on where the property is, if you do straight line, you would be within that quarter mile, but actual walkability, you'd have to go down Loves Creek, which doesn't have any sidewalks, walk along a busy route, come up Buffett Mill to get into the nearest transit line. So that's why I'm asking the question, how it's calculated there.
I'll defer to engineering on that question.
appreciate you bringing that up. There we go. I appreciate you bringing that up. It's actually a practicality we've run into recently in plans review. Due to the wording, it's just a straight line. And so straight line measurement. So we have run into issues where it's pretty big roads with no shoulders or sidewalks, or a hill between the property and the transit route. So to ensure it is a straight line measurement, since the code isn't more specific.
Yeah, Loves Creek's not in the TDR though.
No, I was just using that as an example that was brought up, just thinking through how the calculation would be brought in, because again, quarter of a mile, but if you have to go half mile around on some dangerous roads that might not have the shoulders and all that, that's where I think we're starting to get into, I hate changing things on the fly when it's been vetted and all of this without thinking through all the ramifications before doing it. So that's really what I'm trying to get at, is just making sure we don't have some unintended consequences if we do this.
Commissioner Adams.
Thanks. And I'm glad that you pointed out that the Loves Creek example is not in the TDR, so it is not something that's affected by this current proposal for MMH. And I know that we did receive comments from some community members who were also concerned about this, but the neighborhoods that they were talking about are not inside the TDR, so it's not something that would be affecting those. And I know from some of the meetings that were held prior to today with community members and talking with Lindsay and hearing from Ms. Ball that these MMH guidelines are very specific in terms of the design guidelines to this TDR area. So this would have to be completely reviewed, and if it was to go outside of the TDR. So I think that's really important for the community to understand that. I loved hearing from everyone who is in favor of this. It's really exciting to hear the different perspectives there and all of the different benefits. In addition to the folks that we heard from today, we also had a letter from AARP, which I thought really bookended. We talked a lot about young people moving here, and then here's an organization that is an advocacy group for older individuals. So we really do see many different types of people who are interested in this type of housing. I wanted to ask a couple of things. One is about measurement, and I keep being the nag on this, but I just want to make sure that in this proposal we have some component to measure this within a year's time for the success of it. And I brought this up at agenda review, so I just want to make sure that that gets into the work today if this passes. So I keep looking to Executive Director Brooks about that, just to make sure that that's in there.
Yeah. If this body chooses to pass these amendments, I think it's part of your motion. I think stating that we would like planning staff to track the progress of these if the amendments are adopted by City Council and report back after a year what's worked, what hasn't worked, sort of just give a general feedback on the amendments. Okay. I think you can state that fairly loosely during your motion.
Okay. We already have a motion on the table, so I would ask for an additional amendment to the motion, Commissioner Shelso, to include that measurement component.
I don't typically see that codified though, right?
That's correct. It doesn't have to be part of it's not part of the code. It's just a directive of this body to planning staff. Again, I think that even stating that on the record now, I mean, it would be noted and included.
If there's some way that it can be codified, that's my desire.
Another thought is you could ask, as part of the amendment itself, add it to our work program. Please add this to your work program where you will track progress of these amendments over the next year and report back to us in 1 year.
Okay.
And so then that would be a directive to me to add it to our work program.
Okay.
Okay, Commissioner Biggs.
Maybe a silly question, but just curious about if the off-street parking requirement were to be reduced to 0.7 spaces per unit. If somebody builds a duplex on a vacant lot, that's 1.4 spaces. What does that practically look like? Are we rounding up? Are we building 1.4 spaces? Are we rounding to the nearest whole number of spaces?
We addressed that at the agenda review. Mr. Berry, you want to get up and speak to that?
Sorry, I know I was.
There is a rounding.
Okay.
And he'll best describe it.
Sure. Brian Berry with City's Plans Review and Building Inspections. If the number is 1.4 or less, it is rounded down. So it would be 1 parking space. If it's 1.5 or more, it's rounded up. So it'd be 2.
Okay, thank you. And I guess just a follow-up question to staff. I know 1 was the number that was initially recommended. Is there any kind of concern with 0.7, noting that will be rounded down in the case of a duplex, or is staff kind of comfortable with that number and kind of that ramification? I don't know if that's a loaded question, but just curious to get reactions.
A little bit. But I think staff is, I think we would be okay if you all wanted to make that recommendation. Again, it's something that we've been given the directive to track over the next year, and if this was to be passed by this body and council, it's something we could report back on.
Commissioner Midas.
Thank you. I just wanted to also ask Director Brooks if you would be tracking with codes complaints from TDR for neighborhoods that they may have about any of these new missing middle houses that are being built, and if there's any complaints that are arising as a result of them?
That's a good question. We do, that we do not track complaints.
Will codes be tracking that?
That would be a question that I would direct to Mr. Berry, if they have a mechanism to track that. Obviously, if we're monitoring this over the next year, we'd be very interested and engaged in wanting to check in with them on a regular basis about what they're hearing on their end. So it would be very deliberate on our part, at least.
Sure. Complaints are recorded in 311, typically with the city, and they're divided out to respective departments to respond to them based on what the complaint is. So they're tied to an address, and so I'm thinking we could take the addresses over the last year and refer them back to and tie them to any kind of address associated with middle housing. So.
I assume you get a lot of complaints about parking in these areas now. I guess my biggest concern would be parking in front yards, parking inappropriately, people not being able to find parking, off-street parking in some of these areas. Is that right? Could that be something that you could track?
The city, yes, the city could track that. Our codes enforcement, neighborhood codes enforcement, typically handles those complaints. So.
Okay, thank you. I guess, I appreciate everyone's comments today. I am supportive of missing middle. Is it perfect? No. I don't think any of us probably agree it's perfect. I do appreciate all the time that the city has gone into this and all the community input that has been given for this ordinance. I worry sometimes. I'm going to support the motion on the table, but I do worry sometime about changing things in our meeting when there's been such an extensive amount of community input given, and then we're changing something, and especially, our staff, I feel like, is going in and making a lot of effort to try to find something that's agreeable to both neighborhoods and developers. But we need a place to start, and I guess as long as there's processes in place to track going forward over the past year or 2 years to make certain changes so that it's agreeable to these neighborhoods as well, then I feel like I can support this amendment on this motion that's on the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Midas. Commissioner Smith.
And again, I hate to be trying to think through all the unintended consequences. I'm wondering if there's a way to accomplish what you're going for, Commissioner Selso, but also give some flexibility within the codes department that we could maybe look at saying off-street parking, vehicle parking, each dwelling unit requires between 0.7 spaces and 1.0 upon final. Give them some flexibility because not everything is equally applied. And if they're rounding down and you're building 2 and it only calls for 1, but really 2 would be needed in that area, there's no flexibility for them to go back and say, you got to put 2 in just based on where this might be. So I'm just trying to give a little bit of flexibility within that so that I guess the city has some final say based on that, but it's not handcuffed one way or the other. Is really where I'm just trying to make sure we don't get ourselves, because you can't unring a bell, and if we just change this on the fly today to 0.7, all of this starts happening, we get a year down the road, we come back to change it, we can't unring everything that's happened up till that point, and there's problems.
Commissioner Midas. Okay.
I think that the way the ordinance is written, it has to have one spot per unit. Is that the way it is currently written? So this is allowing you to have less than one spot per unit.
Yes. Commissioner Higgins.
If I could just clarify on Commissioner Smith's comment, are you saying have it written that way so that if there was an instance where plans review had been receiving complaints, about parking, and they're looking at a site and saying there's room for more parking, you're only providing, 1 or 2, and we think you should, do the full 1 per unit, giving them that freedom to enforce that?
That's what I'm looking for without saying, no, they can't, but also not saying that they have to go to the max right off the bat. Again, just giving some flexibility, because this is new and coming in. Give a little bit of grace all the way around for what will eventually be the new Knoxville. That's really where my mind is.
Commissioner Smith, while this may be new to us, it's really not new. And I've often referenced 12th Avenue South from 8th to 12th Avenue, and they have no parking requirements, and it has worked very successfully. So there are, examples out there that prove this to be a plausible option. Commissioner Adams.
I was going to somewhat echo what you said, and also I normally agree about not changing things in meeting like this for all the reasons that Commissioner Midas just referenced. In this particular case, I would even be willing to look at something more aggressive than what Commissioner Selso is offering. So I'm not concerned about what he's offering. And part of that rationale is what Commissioner Hill has raised with Nashville. We talked about in the agenda review session, Atlanta as another example. And then the number of comments from people who were in favor of this proposal who said that as well, that they would be in favor of even a more assertive addressing of the parking requirement really stuck with me. So that's why I feel comfortable with this change, and am comfortable if it goes a little further.
Commissioner Huber.
I guess, I'm not wanting to change anything so much, but I guess the question too, though, could it be handled, that 0.7 be handled under administrative variations? Similar to right now, the city works where if you're within a quarter mile of the transit, you can apply for the 30% reduction. We're in this job, we're talking about eliminating that within a quarter mile, but could it be possible to just say if you're in the TDR, then you are allowed to have or ask for up to a 30% reduction, or reducing 1 unit down to 0.7. But that might give staff a little bit of, if there's negative feedback, or if they look in one instance, as Mr. Smith was saying, well, it just makes sense that there really needs to be 2 parking places right there. but you only have to do one, but we'd like it if you did another one. It would give them the opportunity to say, well, we understand what you're asking, but in this scenario, we think that we would not necessarily approve that variance, the administrative variation. It's just a thought. I just wanted to throw it out.
Commissioner Biggs.
I'd support, that thought of kind of providing the administrative variance. And I was just going to say that doing some, quick math over here, I think I'm getting more comfortable with the 0.7 number as well, because, in a quad unit that rounds to 3, and then you add 1 for, off-street parking, and you're at 4, and kind of that same logic applies all the way down. So I think when you include the off-street parking that would be in front of any of these lots, you end up matching 1 for 1 the units with the number of parking spaces that would be available, whether that's off or on street. So I don't know, just wanted to share that small revelation on my part.
Yeah, and let's not lose sight of, there's not going to be this widespread building of middle housing. This is going to be so incremental that you're talking, when we talk about parking, it's not, we're going to be having this, flood of parking needs. You might see 1 to a particular area in a year. That would be probably my guess. I mean, these are going to be very small in numbers. So when we talk about the concern for parking, I don't think we're talking about a flood of that we're all of a sudden changing a desire for greater parking need because it is so incremental. Commissioner Smith. Oh, and just to add that there are so many benefits to reducing parking, as Ms. Crockett said, the green space, trees, it protects pedestrians. On-street parking protects pedestrians on sidewalks, just like you see down Gay Street. That's what helps make those areas so walkable. They feel protected, protects bike lanes. So a number of benefits. It also reduces speeds on our streets. So a lot of benefits to that option. Commissioner Scelso, have you regretted making this motion yet?
I'm not. So if you would allow a little dialogue with me and Mr.
Sure.
Higgins for a moment.
Go right ahead.
Commissioner Higgins, okay, so for setbacks, so you said all setbacks, meaning particularly thinking rear setbacks as well? Is that why? Because the side setback of 5 feet, I mean, that's our minimum setback for any structure of any sort, a shed. Well, no, I think you can get no, it's 5 for everything, I believe, right? So what would be the reasoning to allow a greater side setback? And then additionally, I think there are some building codes with fire that you can't have two buildings 5 feet, closer than 5 feet apart. So if we were to go with a 50% reduction in a side setback at 2.5 feet, I mean, I guess the neighbor could do that too, but is that?
I'm glad you point that out because that would be a driver here. If someone was trying to get within 5 feet of the property line, they would have to have a fire rating on that wall and any openings on that wall. So it's highly unlikely that anyone would want to do that if they were. That doesn't necessarily apply when you're up against a right-of-way. So that's why you can have like a 0 lot on a front. But I think having it as staff, just to not add too many points. That's why I'm saying all setbacks, because I do think there are instances where rear and side setbacks may need. It may make more sense to go one way or the other. To your point, though, I think 20% makes sense for those. I think greater for the front setback. Again, if we were to try to broad stroke apply this and say all setbacks 50%, there would still be 2 factors controlling that. There would be the staff's review of that. And then there would also be the building code aspect, which would say if you are that close, if for some reason staff says, yeah, we will allow less than 5 feet here, you're still going to have that fire rated to a pretty extreme, and that would dissuade most people unless there was a situation where it really just made sense to do that there. So that's the reasoning for including all setbacks.
So a proposal to add a number 4, theoretically, front or all other setbacks, because this would not already include the included side setback that's written, or you want to change that one too?
We could modify number 2 to say corner side and rear setbacks to 20%, and then add a 4th one that says front setbacks up to 50%. That would be probably the cleanest way to do that.
Up to 50% provided the setback is consistent with the neighborhood.
Yes.
I mean, do you think they should be consistent with the neighborhood for all setback variances, though?
I think that would be up to staff's review to determine that. It may be a situation where there's a tree that you want to scoot over the building just to save, and I'll let Amy comment on that too.
I'll just comment that that's the overall intent of this entire section of these amendments, is to make sure that whatever is built is compatible with the surrounding neighborhood.
So that would be, it doesn't need to be written in necessarily.
I mean,
Yeah.
I actually would encourage you to write it in.
Yeah, okay. All right, so I will change my amendment to, for 46G1A, I'll add a 4th. It's new, right? Front setbacks, a decrease in the minimum front setback up to 50%, provided the setback is consistent with the neighborhood. And then amend number 2 of 46G1A2 to include side setbacks and rear setbacks. So side setbacks and rear setbacks, along with corner side setbacks, would all get 20% variation. And there would be a new 4th section that allows front setbacks to have up to 50%. So I amend my amendment
To include those
to include
two.
that.
Okay,
I'll re-second your amendment.
okay. All right. Commissioner Adams.
Sorry, I just want to make sure that Lindsay Crockett, who's worked on this so much, is tracking those and saying, yes, this is fitting nicely with this plan or not.
Thank you, Commissioner Adams. In general, I feel comfortable with the changes that are made. I would add that these dimensional standards have maximum building widths and depths, which helps in that. There's always going to be a maximum that the building itself can be. And I think we did select the interior side setbacks at a maximum at 5 feet to account for those building code reasons and to ensure that folks would be able to incorporate windows on their side elevations. There are also design standards that speak to that. So in general, I do feel comfortable with those amendments.
And one last amendment, Commissioner Levinson, if you would listen, to add that we would like to add a progress report of missing middle housing added to the work program upon the anniversary of the first missing middle housing development approval. Not a year from passage, but the first one getting approved.
Second.
Okay, seeing no other lights. Everybody clear on what we're voting on? Commissioner Shelso's revisions that he just spelled out. So a yes will be and a vote for approval of that. So all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
We've got 2 noes, is that right? 2 noes? Okay, so, all right. What's our count? 11 to 2. Motion passes 11 to 2. Thank you. All right. Computer's gone to sleep here. On to, we'll now be addressing agenda item number 6. To give some background to item number 6, the attached amendment to the city zoning code, Article 5, was proposed by Mr. Bentley Marlowe in August of 2023. At the August 10, 2023 meeting, the Planning Commission recommended zoning code amendments to enable middle housing in the city follow the process of implementation as defined in the September 22 missing middle housing scan.
Mr. Chairman, I am so sorry. Before you go on, the item we just did, what I've got before me says an amendment to that. Did we just vote on the amendment only, or was that the actual motion?
That
with
was
an
the
amendment?
motion.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and the missing middle, okay, process, and, okay. At its September 5th, 2023 meeting, City Council referred the ordinance back to the Planning Commission for further review and consideration. The proposed amendments are summarized below, which includes establishes a new setback standard in cases where the CN zone features residential use and abuts residential districts, in which case the minimum interior side setback along shared lot lines with residential districts would be 10 feet or 20% of the lot depth, whichever is less. Item 2 eliminates the minimum corner side setback in CN zone except when site distance cannot be achieved, in which case the minimum would be 15 feet. Item 3 reduces the minimum rear setback from 20 feet to 10 feet unless the property abuts a residential district, in which case the rear setback would be 20 feet or 20% of the lot depth, whichever is less. Staff is recommending denial of the amendments as proposed to the City of Knoxville Zoning Code Article 5. As permitting for residential uses in the CN zone occurs within plans review and inspections, planning staff do not evaluate residential development in this zone, and further analysis would be needed from both departments. Additionally, setback reductions based on housing forms are incorporated into the city's proposed middle housing standards. Is the applicant present? Do we have any opposition? You may proceed.
Hi, R. Bentley Marlowe, 322 Douglas, 37921. I think this ties in with the missing middle. I know the city's proposal and the scope of Opticos didn't include CN, but as somebody who's been building missing middle housing for years in Mechanicsville, which is inside the TDR, I think this is needed to open up potential on small lots, or what's smaller than many would consider on some of our corridors going, not real big corridors, whatever the connectors, next lower level like University and Fifth. Those need to be developed with commercial nodes and take advantage of the CN zoning. And I think the best way to do that is by using that space kind of as mixed use. We hear a lot from council, they're wanting to do that on our major corridors. Why not also look at doing it along our connectors like Fifth and University to create neighborhood corridors in our neighborhoods and also simultaneously address housing crisis. And to do that on some of these smaller lots, we need to think about reducing these setbacks, particularly the side setback, and then the rear setback when it abuts with residential. Because if you're using CN to do residential so that we can get more density, because CN was excluded from the missing middle proposal, I don't see why it makes sense to require larger setbacks. I mean, I get it if you're putting a tire shop or some other commercial use on that CN, but if we're using it for townhomes or duplexes or triplexes or whatever we're building for housing exclusively, I think we should reduce these setbacks. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Marlowe. Commissioner Higgins.
Yeah, it seems like this could actually be beneficial because CN is meant to be within neighborhood areas. It's a commercial zoning within neighborhood areas. It's a lower intensity. So I think that I don't see why a use, if you were doing a residential use next to a residential use, just because of the zoning, it doesn't really make sense to me that it would have a greater setback than its neighbor might. So I don't know if staff could comment on why that shouldn't be altered in any way.
there's a number of different uses that are allowed in the CN. It's not just residential uses. I think that is primarily one of the concerns, is that at any point in time, those uses could change by right under that particular zone.
So you're saying if someone built residential and then they converted it to commercial, that would be the concern there? Is the possibility of that happening?
Potentially be a concern, yes.
Okay. It seems like that happens already, with the DK zone. Every building down here has had multiple different uses. So I think that there's some merit to this proposal, and maybe it should just say, this in when the use is residential, then there could be some different setbacks, but I don't know, I'd like to hear what others have to say.
Commissioner Adams.
Because so much of the staff report for this item refers to the MMH that we literally just passed and hasn't gone to council yet and may get modified additionally there or may pass or may not pass, I do not feel comfortable making this adjustment because it seems to be referring to something that is still in action. So I would not be in favor of passing this at this time.
Commissioner Scelso.
Yeah, I agree that there's the concern about, how do you permit it and say, oh, it's a residential use, but then it changes later upon completion, I think is something to think about. And this was, analyzed, it seems, in the scope of missing middle housing, and maybe it shouldn't. And so I wouldn't be opposed to, kicking this like way down the road and like waiting for city council to do what they do with the missing middle housing proposal, and then us looking at this maybe in a different lens in like 90 days.
Commissioner Adams?
I definitely feel better about that than I would trying to do something right now. However, I guess thinking about the work program of planning, is that the place that it needs to be positioned, which is just a different concern.
Director Brooks, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I just want to point out, this is stated in the staff recommendation, but I think it is important for us to mention again that permitting residential uses in the CN zone occurs within plans review and inspections. Planning staff do not evaluate residential development in the zone. And so further analysis by our department, it couldn't just happen within the planning group. So we would need really plans review and inspections as well, probably taking a lead in that. And I don't think that's within the purview of this body is to direct them. It can be a request to monitor it and take a closer look at it, but just caution you all now.
I move that we postpone for 90 days.
Second.
We've got a motion by Commissioner Scelso to postpone for 90 days, seconded by Commissioner Higgins. We've got still a light or two on. Commissioner Biggs.
Yeah, I was going to, suggest that we maybe postpone for longer than 90 days. I don't know what we'll know new in 90 days, but I guess besides how council votes on this, but it seems like maybe the more year check-in once we see how the missing middle's actually been adopted and if this is a barrier that has kind of been presented because it wasn't identified as a barrier by the Optico study, I feel like that would be a more appropriate time where we'd be more informed to revisit this, but understand there's already a second on the table.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion and a second to postpone for 90 days. Commissioner Adams.
A question about if we don't, postponements longer than 90 days, would we be tabling this?
We can postpone it when we get there if you want again.
We'll let this motion go through.
Okay. Okay, Commissioner Midas.
I was just going to mention, I was just looking at the use matrix, and I feel like by approving this, and if a residential use is used on that lot, you're going to actually probably, we're going to probably dictate what happens along that corridor. I mean, there's a special use for many of these, like an eating establishment, offices, industrial use. I mean, some of these things are special uses that, we would have to consider whether we would be willing to allow for special use in this CN, given that there's, it's going to be abutting a neighbor, a residence with a very limited amount of setback. So I don't see myself supporting this now. I don't know, in 90 days, probably not.
Maybe this question is appropriate for Mr. Berry there. Mr. Berry, Brian? Mr. Berry? I got a question for you here. Is there a way to, if they confine it or restrict it, I know we're going to vote on postponement, but we can have a little discussion here, to that once it is defined as residential, that it cannot be, it could not be backfilled by something other than residential. So it couldn't be existing non-conforming, that in order for it to go really to perform as CN non-residential, you'd have to basically tear the structure down and go back to the whatever the setback is today. Is that a clear question to you?
I'm going to have to ask you to repeat that one more
Okay,
time.
so what we're talking
about.
about here is reducing a setback if residential, in a residential use in CN.
Okay.
And the concern is that it becomes something other than residential, right? Isn't that our concern? Is that right? Okay.
I don't know if that's the concern necessarily.
Is there another concern? But, okay, so let's go on with this one. Is there a way to, I guess, secure that to where it could not be a non-residential use unless they tore the structure down? Would it be, what I'm asking, does it become legal non-conforming if the use changes to non-residential?
So you have to give me just a second. Let me look at the code here.
While he's doing that, can I?
Sure, go right ahead, yeah.
Thank you. Also, again, we talked about residential adjacent to commercial and those potential conflicts. But again, I want to point you back to the staff report and the staff analysis. And there's the two, I think there's a number of really good points in here in terms of the staff analysis, but the last two in particular, I'll call your attention to that. Eliminating minimum corner side and reducing rear and interior setbacks could result in construction of buildings which may be out of scale with the surrounding neighborhood. And then additionally, allowing city engineering department to set the setback during permitting would create a situation in which applicants could submit plans that were not approvable due to the uncertainty of the setback standards. Again, we just think that this needs, if this was to move forward, it needs more analysis by plans review and inspection.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Berry. So we have a motion and a second to postpone for, what? No? Oh, well, maybe you didn't answer the question, did you? You got out of here without answering. She distracted me.
All right. So my thoughts on that are, it looks within the zoning code in the commercial neighborhood, there is no distinguishing setbacks between a residential or a non-residential structure. So if something was built as a residential structure, it would be required to comply with the setbacks associated with CN. Now, if that use went out and a non-residential use wanted to go in, it would have to meet building code requirements in order for whatever that use would be. There would also be parking requirements associated with it. So as far as the question as to whether or not whether it would require the demolition of the structure and a new structure, that'd be kind of speculative. I think it would be a case-by-case scenario. Like we couldn't require it necessarily to be demolished if it could be retrofitted and meet the building code and meet the zoning code from a residential use to a non-residential use. Does that make sense?
But if the non-residential had a setback that did not comply, but it did comply with residential. Okay, so I think what we're saying here is we were going to decrease it for residential use,
Okay.
but not for non-residential use. Could you enforce that to where it wouldn't be legal non-conforming?
I don't think so, but I would defer to the law department on that. Probably.
Okay. Well, maybe we can ponder that for 90 days if this passes. So, Commissioner Shelso.
One more comment. I mean, in a lot of these scenarios where we're thinking about building residential on CN, another reason for not postponing 90 days is, I mean, we may have missing middle in our code, and a developer could apply to rezone their property to a residential zone with a 5-foot setback, so, right? So
Yeah, good point.
it might not be necessary.
Good point. Okay, so we have a motion and a second to postpone for 90 days. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. We've got 2 noes, 11-2. Is that right, Mr. DeArmond? All right, motion carries. Thank you. Okay. We're on item number 7, is it right? Okay. All right, on to item number 7. Staff recommendation is recommend approval of amendments to section 10.3B3, removing requirement that building officials certify the utilities are adequate for an ADU. Part of 10.B.7, removing interior side and rear setbacks specific to ADUs. 10.B.8, removing maximum gross floor area requirements based on lot area. Let's see here. Background, the attached amendment. Okay, excuse me. Recommend denial of amendments to section 10.3.A.4, removing the 18-foot height requirement for accessory structures. 10.3.B.2, removing the owner-occupied requirement in TDR land use areas. 10.3.B.4, removing the minimum lot area requirement for an ADU. Part of 10.B.7, allowing ADUs in front and corner side yards. 10.3.B.9, adding a new standard based on primary dwellings smaller than 1,250 square feet. And 10.3.B.11, removing the parking space requirement. The attached amendment to the City of Knoxville Zoning Code, Article 10, is a revised version of the amendment originally proposed by Mr. Bentley Marlowe in August 2023, Exhibit B. At the August 10, 2023 meeting, the Planning Commission approved an amended version submitted by a Planning Commissioner, Exhibit C, at its September 5, 2023 meeting. City Council referred the ordinance back to the Planning Commission and its staff for their review and consideration. The proposed amendments are summarized in the report. Is the applicant present?
R. Bentley Marlowe, 322 Douglas Avenue.
Do we have any
37921.
opposition? Okay.
Just trying to open up and make better use of our ADU ordinance in the city, because not many are getting built. Many are being built illegally as just accessory structures. The only difference being you can't have a cooking appliance in there. They're moved in later. This would bring conformity to allow people that are doing this already, they could now do it legally. The 18-foot height requirement is very challenging when you want to have a garage that'll hold an SUV, or you want to suspend a bike or a kayak or canoe over your car. I'm working on a project like that right now. We've got all this urban wilderness, and we're encouraging our greenways and blueways. It seems like we need to allow accessory structures to house those bikes and kayaks. I'm okay. I didn't mean to allow ADUs in front yards, only corner side yards. I guess that was oversight on my part. I don't have the luxury of having a staff to help me. So I'm okay with modifying that 10.B.7. But I really think we need to get away from the owner-occupied requirement. I know that's the most contentious, but that is what's holding this back from being used across the city. And I think we could narrowly tailor this and put it only in the TDR areas, kind of mimicking the MMH that you just passed. as kind of a trial run. If you recall from the Optico's reports and the Optico's book, Missing Middle Housing, they advocate the usage of ADUs all throughout the book on all types of their housing styles up to the quadplex. So I think that this could dovetail into that nicely, and it can also stand alone. And I think if we do this sort of as a pilot, removing owner-occupied, limited to the TDR areas, we could see if any of the Armageddon hellscapes that West Knoxville folks fear actually come true. Thank you.
Thank you. We have some folks signed up to speak. Mr. Aaron Jernigan.
Thank you, Commission. Aaron Jernigan, 529 Atlantic Avenue. The recode process conceded previously legal duplexes in service to misinformed ideologies about neighborhood character and awarded the consolation prize of ADUs, or accessory dwelling units. One concerned with housing supply and affordability would hope that one lost duplex, or 2 homes, equals 1 gained ADU. Also 2 homes when you count the single-family home in front, right? Well, this is simply not the case in Knoxville. Planning staff in a previous iteration of this assembly have expressed their surprise at how few permits have been issued for ADUs since recode. And by the way, I'm kind of curious about what that number actually is. I think that would be good for us to know if staff is willing to comment on that later. Some background about myself. I'm a proud resident of Oakwood Lincoln Park for 6 years and lived in Old North just before that. I was born in a small town in western Kentucky. I am an architectural designer by day, and my wife is a teacher at Christenberry Elementary. Together, we set out to build a 400 square foot ADU recently and found that it would cost about $100,000 to build. Sounds great. Guess what it appraised for? For those who don't know, when you're building a new structure, the bank appraises the design drawings before the build to determine if the project is financially sound. Well, it appraised for $20,000, 1/5 of the cost to build. So to accomplish the build, I would only need an extra $80,000 on top of a typical cash contingency and down payment. So that was the death of that project. Purely from a financing perspective, it's no wonder that ADUs are not getting built. I would venture to guess your average Knoxvillian does not have a spare $80K. So what do? How can zoning policy change this financing issue? Well, the botched appraisal comes from a lack of comps or comparable properties. Our current zoning policy of requiring on-site owner occupancy for ADUs prevents developers from building ADUs, which was the intent, and thus reduces supply and reduces comps. Because of that policy, no one can build an ADU unless they build it with cash. Who has that kind of access to cash? Developers do. I urge you to strike down the on-site owner-occupant rule so that we can start getting some comps in the marketplace and regular people can enjoy a granny flat, a mother-in-law suite, a place for their college student to live, house a traveling worker, or provide an affordable unit for someone who may otherwise be forced to rent more expensive, larger unit, whether they need it or not. And if I have a few extra
Mr.
moments.
Jernigan, if you could just wrap up, please.
I have about one other paragraph on another topic, if I could just quickly go through it. I'd like to discuss the height restrictions for ADUs. The current maximum height for accessory structures precludes garage apartments, which are a typology that most people like. Garage apartments are useful to accommodate parking, housing, and impervious surface considerations congruently. A win-win-win. To build a garage apartment, you'll want a 9-foot ceiling for the garage, 1 foot for the floor structure, 8-foot minimum ceilings for the dwelling unit above, 2 feet for attic insulation, and at least 1 to 2 more feet for attic ventilation and roof structure. This assumes a low slope roof, and it totals just over 4 feet. in the interest of finishing up quickly, if we could just make a small adjustment to this height, we could allow a whole new typology of garage apartments, which people like. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jernigan. Mr. Drew Harper.
Hey, I'm Drew Harper. I'm from 4318 Washington Pike, number 101. I can give like half of my time back to Aaron for him to, meaning I'll only take a couple minutes. I echo what the previous two speakers said. I want to touch on a couple things, namely on setbacks. I believe I spoke about this when this was first brought before this body, and I talked about the safety benefits of decreasing setbacks, right? If we have narrower lines of sight for cars and motorcycles. There's just study after study showed that that's safer. Since it's a bit counterintuitive, right? Since that time, people have died in Knoxville, but pedestrians and cyclists. They've gotten hit by cars on very widely designed places and died. I saw a recent stat that if the United States had matched our peer countries in working toward Vision Zero, as Bike Walk was talking about earlier, we would save about 20,000 lives a year. Also on the parking requirement, just briefly, I have a house in Old North. I have 0 off-street parking. If I were to build an ADU, I would have to basically replace an on-street spot with an off-street spot. It creates more impervious surface, which is bad for the environment, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Harper. All right. Christina Bowler.
Christina was here earlier and had to leave on account of picking up her child and has asked me if it would be permissible to read her comments.
Okay. I think you guys okay with that? All right. Go right ahead.
So this is, these are read comments for Christina Bowler, 302 Douglas Avenue, 37921. I support removing the owner occupancy requirement for ADUs as well as increasing the maximum height allowances. The owner occupancy requirement for ADUs is unenforceable. For example, if an owner builds an ADU legally and then sells the property, the next property owner is able to lease the house and ADU to separate tenants without occupying the property. Furthermore, property owners can choose to occupy an investment property as their primary residence for a short time merely to meet the owner occupancy requirement and move out after the ADU receives occupancy. My understanding is that very little can be done by the city to meaningfully enforce the owner occupancy requirement. Because of these loopholes, I believe this regulation is unfair and an unnecessary burden to incremental development. There are already so many barriers to ADU development independent of zoning. ADUs tend to underappraise, making them difficult to finance. Many lots are too small, have topographical challenges, or have other structures on the lot which would make ADU development prohibitive. There are many reasons why we would not expect ADUs to pop up everywhere if we lessened these requirements. Since this proposal has been amended to apply only to the TDR, the opportunities are even less. Furthermore, it harmonizes well with the city proposed ordinance amendments by providing an alternative option for adding an additional unit on lots with existing single-family homes, making demolition of the existing housing even less likely. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Commissioner Higgins.
Thank you. I'll start off by saying I agree with a lot of what staff has said in here. I do see some flaws in some of the, or some potential problems that could come from some of these things. But I do think that the owner-occupied requirement, regardless of the zone or the sector plan, doesn't really make any sense to keep, because it's, and one of the speakers mentioned this, it is not really enforceable long-term. It's not the same as, we have a requirement with short-term rentals of owner occupancy, and that's an ongoing thing, right? With an accessory dwelling unit, it's very simple. If someone is really determined to, build one, to change their address to whatever that is, build it and then change their address back. Or if they live there, build it, sell the house, and now it's no longer owner occupied. Doesn't make the community any worse off because of that. And I think that this requirement is outdated, and we've had this allowance since, this opportunity to do ADUs since Recode, and have not seen widespread application of it, and have definitely, I don't think, seen any issues from it. So I think that it would make sense to remove that. And I think a potential compromise could be looking at maybe if we could add it as a special use, where if it were not owner occupied, they would have to go through the special use or use on review process and come here. I don't know if that's something that we could do. Amy's shaking her head, so I doubt it. But I don't think that, I agree with the applicant. I think that we should remove the owner occupied requirement. So I'll let others talk.
Commissioner Shelso.
I also agree that the owner occupancy requirement should be removed. I mean, this body sent it to city council with it removed. So I'd like to go ahead and make the motion to approve the amendments that have been outlined to be recommended approval per staff, section 10.3B3, part of 10B7, 10B8, and making 10.3B2, removing the last sentence of that current code as written, which is one of the dwelling units must be occupied by the owner of the property.
Second.
Okay, so we have just catching up here. We've got a motion by Commissioner Shelso as described by Commissioner Shelso. So we've got some things we're approving and some things we're not approving. So basically, he's going by staff recommendation with the exception of denying the removing the owner occupied requirement in the TDR land use areas, right? Right. Everybody clear on that? What we're doing here. We've got a second by Commissioner Higgins and Commissioner Biggs.
I know there's been some commentary about the lack of ability to enforce owner occupancy, and I'm just curious if, similar to the missing middle sort of diligence, if staff has done any work with talking to maybe some peer cities. As a prior resident of Nashville, I recall that that was a requirement in Nashville, owner occupancy, and don't recall hearing challenges with enforceability, and know that was a deterrent for some neighborhoods kind of being converted into short-term rental properties, with kind of both properties being rented out simultaneously, ADU and the main structure. So I guess, question to staff, around this issue, do we know if other peer cities have adopted, no requirements for owner occupancy and what results have been? And I guess if not, I'd love for us to spend more time on that before approving this.
Okay. Thank you.
I know that we do not have that information. We have not done that research. We also don't issue permits. That's something that the city of Knoxville handles for these. But
Commissioner Midas.
Okay, so I'm confused. I'm looking through this. Is the staff's recommendation in green?
The green text is the amendments proposed by the applicant.
So what is staff's recommendation?
So the staff recommendation is what's on the screen right there. The sections for approval are laid out, and then denial are laid out in the second position. It's the first page, the memo in front of the package.
Okay. And
So the only deviation is the 10.3.B.2, and that would go up into the approval group, if you will.
Okay, so
Right.
I'm proposing that we approve what's recommended for approval, plus 10B2, whatever, removing the owner occupancy requirement everywhere.
Oh, okay, not
Yeah.
just in TDR.
Correct.
Okay, okay.
And that's what I'm
sorry.
seconding.
I was unclear on that.
So striking from the current code the last sentence only of that section.
In addition to staff's recommendations.
Right.
Are we clear on that? Is everybody clear on that? Okay. Commissioner Biggs? You, okay. What's that?
Is he also recommending denial? Commissioner, are you also, with the exception of 10.3.B2, recommending denial per staff's recommendation of the other items?
So
Thank you. I just-
staff
The only
recommendation for
deviation.
everything except for removing the owner occupancy requirement everywhere.
Okay, everybody clear? Yes. You clear? Okay. Everybody clear? Commissioner Midas?
Well, I'm just going to say that I won't be supporting this amendment. I am aware of how much public input went into allowing ADUs all throughout the city, and that owner occupancy was a big issue. Whether it needs to stay or not, I don't know that. I'm agreeable to maybe changing that, but I feel like the public input needs to happen and hasn't happened yet regarding that.
Okay, let's vote. All in favor of Commissioner Shelso's motion, and which was seconded by Commissioner Higgins, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay, let's do a roll call. Mr. DeArmond?
Commissioner Uten? No. Commissioner Boyer?
No.
Commissioner Huber?
Yes.
Commissioner Shelso?
Yes.
Commissioner Perez?
Yes.
Commissioner Higgins?
Yes.
Commissioner Levinson?
Yes.
Commissioner Biggs?
No.
Commissioner Adams has left. Commissioner Smith?
No.
Commissioner Midas?
No.
Commissioner Overton?
Yes.
And Commissioner Hill.
I was hoping he would forget. Yes.
Okay.
Motion passes 7-5. Is that right, Mr. DeArmond?
That's correct.
All right. 16. Let's take a 10-minute break. Moving on to item 16, subdivision Nathan's Cove, applicant North Shore Construction, Inc. Location north of side Lonis Drive, south side of Kim Watt Drive, 3.37 acres. Zoning RN2, let's see. Existing land use, single-family residential and rural residential. Proposed use, 14-lot subdivision of detached single-family dwellings. Number of lots, 14. Subdivision variances, they are asking for one variance and two alternative design standards. Let's see. The staff recommendation, this is going to require 3 motions. Staff recommendation, approve the requested variance to reduce the minimum intersection separation between Nathan's Cove Way and Shirley Way from 300 feet to 125 feet based on the following evidence of hardship. A, the reduction in the intersection separation is warranted due to the topography and the location of the property. B, the topography and location of the property with respect to the adjacent streets create a situation that is unique to the property. C, based on information submitted as part of the application, the purpose of this variance does not appear to be based exclusively upon a desire for financial gain, but is the result of physical attributes of the property. D, the proposed road layout will not be detrimental to public safety or welfare or injurious to other property or improvements in the neighborhood because left turn conflicts are not anticipated due to the low traffic volumes of Shirley Way and the anticipated low traffic volumes of this 14-lot subdivision. That's motion one. Motion two, approve the requested alternative design standards based on recommendations of City of Knoxville Engineering Department. And the third motion would be approve the concept plan subject to the 7 noted conditions. Is the applicant present? Do we have any opposition? All right.
Garrett Tucker, 7523 Taggart Lane, Knoxville. Yes, well, we are fine with the conditions, and we just request approval.
All right.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion, we approve the requested variance to reduce the minimum intersection separation between Nathan's Cove Way and Shirley Way from 300 to 125 feet based on the following evidence of hardships, which is A and B that you had read into the record earlier.
Second.
All right, we've got a motion from Vice Chair Uten to approve the requested variance based on staff recommendation and seconded by Commissioner Huber. Seeing no lights, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
I'd like to make a motion, we approve the alternative design standards based on city engineering's recommendation.
Second.
All right, we have a motion to approve the requested alternative design standards based on recommendations of the City of Knoxville Engineering Department by Vice Chair Uten, seconded by Commissioner Huber. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the concept plan subject to the 7 conditions.
Second.
Got a motion by Vice Chair Uten to approve the concept plan subject to 7 conditions, seconded by Commissioner Uber. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
22. Okay. Agenda item 22. Applicant Dale Roten, location east side of East Governor Johnsonville Highway, north of Thorn Grove Pike, 2.6 acres. Present plan designation zoning is other open space, agriculture, and historic zoning overlay. Proposed plan designation zoning, general commercial, and general business. Existing land use, agriculture, forestry, vacant land. This will require 2 motions. Staff recommendation is to approve the general commercial land use classification because it is compatible with surrounding development as a minor extension of this classification. Motion 2, approve the general business zone because it is compatible with surrounding development, subject to 2 conditions. Deny the request to remove the historic zoning overlay as recommended by the Historic Zoning Commission. Is the applicant present? Please approach the podium. Any opposition? Okay. Would you like to proceed or defer? Okay. Opposition? One item, let's see.
Hi, Mark Slajewski, 5241 Sinclair Drive. I want to speak on behalf of the historic Ramsey House. I'm the current executive director there. And I just want to take a few minutes to talk about the Ramsey House for those of you who don't know who we are and kind of explain a little bit what our mission is. But we are a private 501c3 nonprofit organization and part of the Association for the Preservation of Tennessee Antiquities, which oversees 8 other historic homes across Tennessee. We are not a state or a federal historical site, so a vast majority of our funding comes from tours, events, sponsorships, and the like. We as an organization are very locally based. I'm the only full-time staff member employed by the Ramsey House, and our board of directors is entirely volunteer-based, with a vast majority of them working full-time in the greater Knoxville community. I also want to take a moment to ask our community members and representatives from other historic homes to do stand up. We do have representatives here from James White Fort, Blunt Mansion, Marble Springs, and Knox Heritage, as well as some community members with us. I also want to, I don't know if you guys have this from the Historic Zoning Commission. We did submit a letter that does include some community signatures on it. I don't know if that was part of the packet that you guys did receive, but I do have some copies of that to pass around if that was not in your online packet there. We depend entirely on volunteers to help us put on our events, as well as to assist with the upkeep and the maintenance of the house and grounds. We periodically host events such as our free outdoor vintage baseball games, which this past year brought in 1,900 individuals to our property across the 6 games that we hosted. They play by 1860s rules, which means they don't play with gloves. They use wicker bats. There's some funky rules that go with it. But we welcome teams from across the state as far as Nashville to our historic grounds. We also host our annual Ancient Sounds Music Festival, which is an outdoor celebration of Celtic and Appalachian music, which is held on our historic grounds Labor Day weekend and is our largest fundraiser of the year. When guests come to the Ramsey House, that is our opportunity for us to share in the rich history of the house itself, the Ramsey family, the individuals who were enslaved on property, and the Cherokee Native Americans who utilized the land prior to the Treaty of the Holston. We welcome schools to our site, integrating state standards to our tours, and providing a kid's opportunity to have a chance to experience history firsthand inside of our house. Of course, we focus on the house itself, showcasing how life was lived in the early 1800s, late 1700s, but we also focus on the Ramsey family. Francis Ramsey is an important part of Tennessee's history, serving as Secretary of the Convention called in 1785 to draw up the Constitution for the proposed state of Franklin, and later served in various other capacities during the state of Tennessee. Being directly off the highway, many guests are shocked at how peaceful our property is, due in many parts to the vegetation buffer between us and the highway, allowing visitors to the Ramsey House a real opportunity to visit the past, not just in the house itself, but on our historic grounds as well. Preservation of not just the land our historic house sits on, but our surrounding areas is important to maintaining our slice of history. The original vegetation buffer that was left behind Dollar General, that 50-foot vegetation buffer, has eroded, and noise is already becoming an issue on our historic property, not to mention the trash that does blow off the highway directly into our wetlands. And I do know we do have a couple other historic houses here who were talking to me recently that say the noise pollution from the highways and the streets that they are on does cause disruptions during their daily operations. But the parcel in question was sold by the Ramsey House Board of Directors in 2014. This predates my involvement with the Ramsey House, and in fact, involvement of the current Board of Directors. It is an entirely new board that sits in the place of the old one. But I can speak a little bit to the institutional memory that we do have of this. Dr. Charles Faulkner, who was a UT archaeologist, he did expansive studies on the Ramsey House property, and indeed a lot of our interpretation of the house comes from what he was able to find during his studies. I believe he worked with us for 15 some odd years. But the parcel that was sold off was never officially actually surveyed to determine its historical significance to the Ramsey House property. And I do know that when the board of directors at the time did sell off the land, there was a pretty massive community backlash directed at the historic Ramsey House. And amongst the board of directors at the time, there was a lot of contention. And I want to thank you guys for your time and consideration.
Thank you for your comments. Let's see, Jan Dickens.
Jan Dickens, 6428 Norwood Drive, 37914. I became a Ramsey House board member in 2016, which was after the property was sold. I became board president in July. I'm also a history teacher, and I serve as education chair at Historic Ramsey House. Perhaps you already feel like you know how you will vote on this matter, but I'd like for you to think back to when you were a kid in school and remember your favorite learning experience. It probably wasn't one where you sat in the classroom and read a chapter and then answered questions. Research tells us that it was most likely when you enjoyed hands-on immersive activities. That's just part of what we provide at Ramsey House in a secluded environment where all our visitors can use their imaginations to step back in time. It's harder to do when you can hear and see the cars and 18-wheelers going up and down John Sevier Highway. It's that peaceful refuge we're trying to protect. It's trees that provide that buffer, that sound barrier between Ramsey House and the highway. You've probably seen the photos. The trees along Sand Branch are dying or being cut down by the beavers. But the trees along the highway are the ones that are not being affected by the beavers and the wetlands. The trees Mr. Roten will remove are the ones we need the most. Perhaps you're inclined to support what you would call economic progress in this matter. The Ramsey family supported economic progress. WBA helped to bring the first steamboats to Knoxville. He also served as the first mayor of Knoxville. He was a member of the initial Manumission Society of Tennessee. And even though his detractors tried to use the fact that he was an abolitionist against him, he still went on to become Secretary of State for Tennessee. Francis Ramsey's other son, JGM, was a historian and a doctor. He helped to establish Knoxville's first medical association and the East Tennessee Historical Society.
Ms. Dickens, if you could wrap up, please.
I will. I can't stop beavers from being beavers. Having the wetlands as a so-called buffer doesn't help keep out the sights and sounds of John Sevier Highway. I can't go back in time when we still had the acreage along the highway, and we don't have the money to buy it back or to invest in beaver control. But I can stand in the gap and try my best to keep another used car lot from being put where the trees now stand. Those trees along the highway are our buffer. Please listen to the Historic Zoning Committee and vote against what Mr. Roten wants to do. I'm asking you to be known as a person who hears wise counsel, takes a stand, and does what's right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Dickens. Let's see here. No, I think that's it. I believe that's all that we have signed up. Would the applicant like to proceed?
My name is Dale Roten. I live about a mile from this property. My address is 4315 French Road, Knoxville. I'm not wanting to destroy the Ramsey house, believe me. This property was owned by the Ramsey house and sold in 14. Of course, the request at that time, the Ramsey house came to do what I'm doing now. They was asking for the dollar store to buy that piece of property beside that's there now, and then the adjacent property on the front. If you show the map, that's not correct. It's the L-shaped map. The one before that you had up there is what we need to see. Yes. See, the PC is there's the dollar store. The part behind it is I'm wanting to leave that part that's adjacent to. Now, this was not in the case of the Historic Commission. It was the whole 5.7 acres, 5.77. At this point, these are the people, the Ramsey House and the Association of Preservation of the Tennessee Iniquities were selling that property to KME, who bought the dollar store. The dollar store now is selling that property 9 years later, and we have reached a contract, assuming we get the historic overlay removed, on the front portion of the property, which is on John Sevier Highway, 2.5 acres. So I'm keeping roughly 40% and giving the historic district roughly 60% and a 200-something foot buffer. That's why it's showing that L shape. The whole L shape, 60% of the property will stay. There's an arrow right through the whole back of the dollar store and the whole back of the front. So it is straight across from where the dollar store is, only to John Sevier Highway, on the exit on John Sevier Highway. All the Thorngrove Pike back to the Ramsey House, even as the part that will be in this property here, will be all zoned or remain zoned agriculture with historic overlay. So they can do what they wish, call what they want to, or no excavating, no worries, because when this was sold, the Ramsey House was wanting this zoned commercial and the historic overlay removed. And at the end, they didn't want the wetlands. Well, this section that's broken off, it retains all the wetlands, and the tree line is going to be the same as it's got with the dollar store. You can't get that close to cutting trees down. And I don't want to cut any trees down anyway. It's just brush is all it is right in front. It has not been maintained for 9 years, you can imagine. But anyway, what I was asking for is of course, the CA zoning, and the section which is in front only, the 2.5 or 6 acres, 2.5 something acres, to have the historic overlay removed, and the other 60%, the 3.14 acres, or 3.25 acres, to be left the way it is. They can retain the historic overlay, and the wetlands will not be bothered. Couldn't bother them anyway. I don't know why. I wouldn't want that. So, in conclusion, I'd just like to say, well, first of all, the planning staff, we tried to vote on that the acreage of the smaller amount, and we couldn't because it had been initiated as 5.77 acres. So this is the first time a vote has been done on removal of only the front part of the historic zoning. All the rest of them had the whole zone, even when it was sold in 14. They approved the front. They couldn't break off just the wetlands because it was not surveyed that way, and they didn't bring it back up. So my due diligence to them to purchase this is that we get this overlay removed in CA zoning, and they can retain roughly better than 55 to 60% of the property the way it is. Let's see, it's on that map right there in conclusion. That way you would retain the buffer, the zone, and you got 1/4 mile from Ramsey House to Johns River Highway now, and then you're going to have to turn right and go another 600 feet just to get to this property. The only entrance would be from Johns River Highway. It wouldn't bother the Ramsey House in any way that I can imagine. So I appreciate your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roten. Commissioner Higgins.
I just have a question for staff. If the historic overlay were to remain there, I know the historic overlay does not prohibit use at all, and I can't imagine it would require you build a log cabin there, even if you know, something that strict. So what is the historic overlay prohibiting right here?
Correct. So in this situation, the historic zoning overlay just introduces an additional level of public process in the design review of what is constructed on the site. So it's not how it can be used, that's related to the base zoning, but it's what the site and the buildings that are constructed on the site look like. The design guidelines for the broader property are relatively general. They're the overarching federal standards for historic preservation. They don't recommend that something be identical to the historic site from which it's associated. So you're correct, they would not be required to construct a stone house. It's primarily just that the new work is compatible with the historic materials, features, size, scale, and proportion and massing of the site, and then that related new construction is undertaken in such a manner that if removed in the future, the essential form and integrity of the historic property and its environment would be unimpaired. And we have a standardized design review process. I know, Commissioner Higgins, you're well familiar with it. We've got a monthly meeting and a deadline associated with each meeting, and we handhold developers through that process.
And staff agrees that removing the historic overlay from the John Sevier side would not be, would not take away from the character of the Ramsey House property?
Yeah, staff recommendation is based on the current request, which is for only the 2.5% of the property, and staff thought was that does not restrict any commercial development. It will just be consistent with the Historic Zoning Commission's decision.
Commissioner Huber.
So I'm very much in support of Ramsey House for sure, and any of the historical buildings we still have left here. So I appreciate the Historical Zoning Board's opinion. But so can you expound on, Mr. Roten, why you requested on all 5.77 acres versus the 2.5 only to have that section removed? Because I can see how an application can be made and that's the decision that has to be rendered. And I just don't want to see kind of the baby thrown out with the bathwater saying, okay, we can't remove it on all of it, because I firmly believe, and I think in what you're saying is the wetland area for sure needs to stay, because contrary to what people believe, even though it is in a wetland, from a development aspect, it's beautiful. I mean, I drove out and drove around and tried to get a real feel for everything out there. It's a beautiful wetland. But if somebody owns that property, it could be developed. Now, you'd have to go through a lot of processes with TDEC and get into a lot of remediation and things like that. And I don't think that's what anybody ever wants. But my point is, I think it is a good idea to leave the historical zoning there for sure. On the front, as I drove up and down John Sevier Highway and all that area out there, it's very industrial. It has very industrial feel. There's pipe manufacturers, there's concrete and earth movers, junkyards. There's a lot of things like that in the immediate vicinity. I just don't think that it necessarily takes away from the Ramsey House if that one section only is not included in it. But my question, getting back to that, is there a reason that you didn't ask for it separate in the beginning, or?
Yeah, I thought you had to ask for the whole thing because you couldn't break it up.
Right.
Then in the process, it was broken up, and then I took it to the historic committee then and said, I just only want the front part. And they could not vote on it as a separate section. I think, is that not correct? And that what you, because I tried to get it to break up, and they said it was presented at 5.77, I couldn't break it up. So that's why I made the note today to make sure that this is the first time that it's ever been presented that way.
Okay.
But that's all I've ever wanted to do that, because, I live in a mile away. I don't want to be.
Yeah.
It's commercial property. It's right on the, it's.
Yeah,
And I don't want industrial. The industrial's all the way around it. So this CEA is a big improvement from what will be, or what it is now. But
well, I guess that brings me to another question. I know we're not necessarily there, but CA is kind of a dual question for staff. I mean, I see the Dollar General got zone PC through some of these discussions back in 2014. Is there a reason staff said CA was okay versus planned commercial, or what was the opinion on that?
I think at that time, the applicant also requested for CA for the Dollar General, but planning staff recommended PC because it was not adjacent to any commercial area. So staff wanted to see the planning commission to be able to see the building that is being built. But now I feel there are some commercial uses, not only to the adjacent lot, but also further north. So there are some commercial areas in the area, and I think that commercial uses are appropriate for that location.
Okay, thank you.
on my part, giving up the 60% of the property, if you don't go CA, then you lose another 50 feet on each side. So you've lost almost another acre of land that you don't have it 2.5 to start with. So
right,
you're losing half the land again. And
so, Lindsay, with respect, I guess, to some of your comments, Commissioner Higgins, who reviews it? I mean, the historical zoning, or is it staff? Who exactly?
Okay, so the Knox County has a 5-person historic zoning commission. They were the body that reviewed this, and I'd like to clarify that they determined that removing the overlay on the entire parcel would have an adverse effect on the historic Ramsey House. The applicant did discuss this configuration with the Historic Zoning Commission in the meeting, but the Historic Zoning Commission went with the staff recommendation that removing it on the entire parcel would have an adverse effect. The HCC reviews new construction on vacant lots. That's not an administrative approval, so that would go in front of the body.
Okay, and you had mentioned, I guess, some of the federal stuff of how that is viewed. And one thing that kind of struck me is when I went out and looked at the Ramsey House, it's beautiful, but it's got some serious hand-stacked stone, really great stonework on it. And, I would have a bit of a concern that they're going to say, well, okay, you're going to have to make it look like the stone that's on the Ramsey House, that type of thing. It would be a concern.
So in terms of federal, there's no federal regulations associated with the site. It's just that the standards, which are similar to the design guidelines that historic districts have, are adopted from federal standards. And I think these are way more general than our local historic districts have set in them. In general, they would not recommend that something replicate a historic structure. The standard there says new work should be differentiated from the old. The key there is just being compatible with the historic environment. Historic preservation guidelines typically discourage trying to construct something that looks old but is not.
Got it. So again, I mean, my feel for it and being familiar with the area, even driving down the driveway, and I know the beavers, we can't control the beavers, but we try to control what we can control. But even in the middle of the winter, I mean, I had trouble. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't see anything on John Spear Highway, any of the buildings or any of that other information or things that are built over there. So that being said, I'd like to make a motion to approve general commercial land use classification because it is compatible with the surrounding development and is a minor extension of this classification. And also approve CA general business zone because it is compatible with the surrounding development subject to two conditions. However, approve the request to remove HZ overlay only on the 2.5 acres on the front, which leaves the 3.27 acres on the back between that lot and the historic Ramsey house. Remove that historic overlay.
Okay, we're going to do them separately, but I let him run with it because it's more efficient that way, actually. So, thank you, Commissioner Huber. Commissioner Shelso. Mr. Reynolds, did you want to say? Oh, okay, I get back. Mr. Reynolds,
I'm used to using the button on the table still. I can wait until after the sector plan amendment discussion if that's more helpful.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we've got a motion and we're seeking a second.
Second.
Okay, we've got a second from Commissioner Smith, and we've got still some lights on. Commissioner Midas.
Yeah, well, you called on me, and then.
Oh, did I call on you? Okay, Commissioner Shelso.
Okay. So we're doing one motion here to approve the land use classification, right? Okay, so part of my thinking about the entire property, it being next to the Ramsey house, is that either the historic overlay provides a level of public input to maintain the sort of compatibility with the adjacent property. And if the historic overlay is not there, I think we should go the route that the Dollar General went and do planned commercial, where then at least the Planning Commission, if we remove the overlay, then the Planning Commission would have a process of public input to maintain the public input of compatibility. Those are my thoughts if we're going to remove the historic overlay.
Commissioner Midas.
Lindsay, it seems like the largest concern they have is about the noise. Does the historical zoning overlay protect development from noise in any way?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Higgins.
I just wanted to clarify because the minutes from the most recent historic zoning meeting are not on the case file, I don't think. I think it's only the ones from 2014 where they did discuss supporting removal on part of this. Is that correct?
So the 2014 case was the separate property. That was the Dollar General property at the intersection. In 2014, they did not review this L-shaped property.
Okay, got it. I don't think I would be in support of removing the historic overlay, and although I do think that there could be an alternative where it's planned commercial, but I don't think that the historic overlay is really detrimental to the use because all it is an extra step of review, and it gives the neighbors an opportunity to give their feedback. And, if the design meets the guideline recommendations, then it will be passed. So with this being a sensitive area, I think that keeping the historic overlay doesn't hurt anything for future owners or future development, especially since it wouldn't require anything necessarily too difficult to accomplish. So, thanks.
Commissioner Huber.
So I have a follow-up question for Mr. Roten. If you had to pick your poison between a historical overlay and a planned commercial, knowing, the planned commercial has heavier setbacks, landscaping requirements, that type of thing, versus a historical overlay, which one would you choose?
I don't know. I mean, on my due diligence, and I don't know if I do either, because, I mean, if you're giving up 60% of your property to historic to keep it like where it is. I mean, they own this property. For 9 years, they had the option to buy this property back at a reasonable cost and keep it the way they want it. But this is commercial property on Johnson River Highway that you try to take care of. I mean, believe me, it's going to be a whole lot better than anything they've got industrial all the way wrapped around it. I mean, it's not like, I mean, if they want to control it, I mean, I would step back and they could buy it. But I mean, I don't think anyone wants to go in there and buy this property and not have an option, at least using the front of it, and let them have the control in the back of it. I mean, they got over half of it. I mean, it's not like you're trying to be, I mean, I think I'm trying to be reasonable. I probably won't buy it, if I don't get that little part, because I think it's necessary, and I don't know what they would do. But I mean, had they not gotten paid in full for this whole property, I can assure you the front would be the same as a dollar store. It would be commercial, be usable. But that's just my opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Let's get this sector out of the way, and then we'll get back on it. Is that all right, you guys? All right. So we've got a motion and a second on, where were we? Approve the general commercial land use classification. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, now let's talk about, Mr. Roten, if you'll get back up there, I've got a question for you. What are your concerns with this historic overlay staying on it?
Well, first of all, the property lays, it's so grown up in briars. I stepped in 3 big, huge anthills trying to walk through this stuff that they've left. It needs to be cleaned up and used at a good commercial place. I mean, it's got all this traffic right up down the highway of Johnson River Highway. I mean, I live on Johnson. Our property joins Johnson River Highway, so I definitely want it nice.
If you'll hang in here with me, I'm going to redirect a question to Ms. Crockett, but hang by the podium here because I may be coming back to you. I'm still trying to figure out what limiting conditions he would have.
Historic Zoning Commission will do a routine process of design review for the new construction built on the property.
Okay, so clearing the property,
It's not reviewed.
no purview over clearing the property.
No.
So what other concerns might you have?
Me?
Yeah.
I have not, and I've gone to the Ramsey House. I mean, it's a nice place.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, the historic zoning on this, I gladly give them this to maintain this cover. There's no visibility. They're afraid I'm going to cut trees down. I'm not going to cut trees down. I don't want it back there. I mean, it's the same as what's there with the dollar store. They don't like the dollar store. The Historic Commission complained to the dollar store last meeting, and I personally think that's the nicest thing on the highway. I mean, I hate to say that, but I mean, it's all this industrial around it. But I'm glad to be next to dollar stores, and it's nice. I don't want to go back through all of this again. I'm too old to worry with this stuff, no offense, so I can walk away. But I mean,
So you don't have a specific concern, you just don't want to go back through
to the historic
historic?
zoning at all. I mean, because I want them to have their part. I want them to have the wetlands, which is what their problem was in the beginning to 2014. That was what the members got upset about. Why they didn't do it then, I don't know. I've talked to them. They just didn't have time to do it. It was on 5.7 acres. They could not separate it at that time, and they was trying to get this dollar store built. So they were in time requirements. They didn't care about the other at that time because they need to get their business done. I understand that. I would too. But the other part, they would have let them have it back then, but they couldn't do it at that time. So I said, the logical thing, do it now. Give it to them and let them use it, Matter of fact, I think, Carson Daly told me that that's what I should do as well. I should give them that part in the back to have that. And I know they think they've got total control of that. I don't know, but I think commission will go with me. I may be wrong. I just think it's common sense to just let them have the control of the back that joins them. I mean, that's 200 or 300 feet of all the stream, the whole stream, and even part of the trees are on this. I mean, I'm not going to cut those trees. So anyway, I'll
Okay,
sign that.
thank you, Mr. Roten. Commissioner Biggs.
I was just going to ask staff if there are precedent examples of commercial being developed like within historic overlay districts, and if there have been successful examples of the historical commission approving commercial.
Yes, because historic zoning does not relate specifically to the base zoning. So there are historic zoning overlays on commercial and residential properties. And there have been, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but there have been multiple new construction projects, whether that's residential or commercial, in historic zoning overlays.
Yeah, in front of the major Reynolds house on Kingston Pike and Bearden Hill, there's a shopping center, a small strip center in front of that building that's zoned historic and went through historic, I'm fairly certain.
Yeah.
I did it.
Okay, Commissioner Smith.
And listening to all this, here's where my biggest concern honestly is falling is an entity sold some property, took the money, and now they want to control what someone else who owns the property does with it. That fundamentally is something I've got an issue with. If they want control, they can buy it back. Otherwise, I would support that the historic zoning on this front section needs to go away. He is protecting it on the back half, keeping the wetlands so that remains, which is honestly more than I've seen a lot of people do that have come before us with this. So I would be more inclined to support what you were originally proposing, Commissioner Huber, just thinking through that. I don't think we should ask any applicant to pick their poison because I think, they've gone through the due process, come before the body. They've walked through this journey. I don't think we should have to try and set them back. So I would be more inclined to voting to remove that historic overlay on that front, 2.3 acres, but keeping it on the back, keeping the wetlands. Again, if you look at that property, right next door is light industrial. I mean, general commercial is going to be a lot less invasive than that light industrial sitting right next door going to the north of the Ramsey house, or the heavy industrial, which is across the street. So I think I'm going to use an analogy. I think we're making a mountain out of a molehill, or an anthill in this case. I think knowing the Dollar General's there, what can be possible in that area with general commercial, I think it would be good for the area. It's not going to be as intrusive as the industrial stuff that's already taking place around it. And honestly, I think the industrial would have more of an adverse impact on that wetland area than what this general commercial would as well. So I would be in support of what the applicant is asking for.
Thank you. Commissioner Higgins.
Thank you. Just to clarify, so we're all on the same page, the Ramsey House has no say over any of this, and none of the historic groups, Knox Heritage, nobody controls this. It's just an overlay that requires that they take it for design review. So I don't see and speaking about like the light industrial and the surrounding context that has this adverse effect, the point of the historic overlay is to prevent things that will have a visual adverse effect. So I don't see any harm, and there's not a specific reason other than just, a desire to avoid going to, that board and having that conversation. I just don't think that is enough justification to remove it when we have that board saying, no, we should not remove it. It's they are appointed to make this recommendation. So I would, if the Historic Zoning Commission for the county had voted to remove the historic overlay on this portion of the property, I don't think I would have a problem with it at all. But since they specifically had that conversation in depth and unanimously recommended that it stay historic on the whole property, I just don't think that it makes sense for us to then go and remove it. So,
Thank you. Ms. Crockett, did they entertain the idea of splitting it, or did they not consider that?
The application did not include that. They did discuss it, but they determined that removing it on the entire parcel would have an adverse effect on the property.
I'm sorry, would you repeat that last part?
They determined that removing the overlay on the entire parcel would have an adverse effect on the
But
property.
what about just
the whole parcel?
But what about the rear part?
That's what they determined, including the part fronting John Sevier Highway. So-
either
Yes.
either one would have an adverse effect.
Yes.
Okay, so a partial would have an adverse
Yes.
effect. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Commissioner Shelso. Wait a minute.
I don't want to talk anymore.
You know? All right, Commissioner Smith.
What you stated, I'm sorry, and perhaps Commissioner Midas and I heard this differently, because what you said was they discussed it only as it exists as a whole parcel, and that removing it on the whole parcel would have an adverse impact, but they didn't actually vote on whether or not the front section, because it wasn't included in the application, even if they had the discussion, they only looked at it as a whole, not as partial one way or the other.
Correct.
So there was no actual feedback from that committee looking at just that front part, if that would be an adverse impact, because they only reviewed the whole. Which would include all of the wetlands.
What say you, Director Brooks?
I don't think I'm going to help clarify this any further, but I think that Ms. Crockett has been clear in saying that they did consider the entire property, and they determined that removal of the HC overlay would have an adverse impact. I think that is the recommendation going forward from them.
Removing anything. Any piece.
Any piece of it would have an adverse impact. Is that correct, Ms. Crockett?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Biggs.
I'll make a motion if we.
Hang on just a
Ready.
minute. Commissioner Biggs. Oh, Mr. Reynolds, did you?
I was going to basically reiterate what Executive Director Brooks mentioned, and also to say that, earlier you called on me and I said I would come back to it when we get talk to the rezoning. And it was basically exactly what Commissioner Shelso said, was that, originally the PC zone was put on the Dollar General store site, recommended rather than the CA zone, because it did come back through a review process through the Planning Commission, rather than having the CA zone, which just eliminated all design review altogether. And so I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Higgins.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve CA general business zone because it's compatible with surrounding development, subject to 2 conditions, and deny the request to remove the historic zoning overlay as recommended by the Historic Zoning Commission.
Second.
Okay, so we've got a motion by Commissioner Higgins to approve per staff recommendation, seconded by Commissioner Shelso. Ms. Crockett, I wish I would have done a little more research on this, but I'm still trying to figure out, and I know this is a little bit of speculation, but I'm guessing maybe they wouldn't approve like a cinder block building or vinyl siding. Is that kind of what we're talking about
Yeah,
here?
I think that's a good example. The materials and more than that, even just the massing of the building and the placement of the building is recommended to be compatible with the context. So I know there are already different restrictions and requirements in the base zoning code for the CA, but they would be discouraged from constructing a 20-story building that's, clad in vinyl or something like that. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay. Commissioner Smith?
Sorry.
Okay.
Can I say one thing?
Yes, sir.
My
Vice Chair,
light-
wake
my light-
up.
My light doesn't work still. The Historic Zoning Commission is going to look at things differently through a different lens as what they're protecting. And we're supposed to be looking at the community as a whole. And this piece of property is on a major commercial, or, it's our major arterial in this town. And if we're going to leave the historic on the back as wide as a swath as that is, and then also require tree protection on the front 50 feet of John Sevier Highway, it's going to be tough to really pull off a great deal on that piece anyway. So I'm probably not going to be supporting that motion.
Okay. We've got a motion and a second to approve per staff recommendation. So let's get to the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no.
No.
Okay, I believe the noes have it, but let's just, to be safe, let's do a roll call.
Okay. Commissioner Uten?
No.
Commissioner Boyer?
No.
Commissioner Huber?
No.
Commissioner Shelso? Commissioner Perez?
No.
Commissioner Higgins?
Yes.
Commissioner Levinson?
No.
Commissioner Biggs?
Yes.
Commissioner Smith?
No.
Commissioner Midas?
No.
Commissioner Overton?
No.
Commissioner Hill?
No. 9-3,
Okay,
the
that's 9-3,
noes.
yes.
Motion fails.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the CA General Business Zone as requested with the two conditions with no historic zoning on the first 2.5 acres.
2.6, was it?
2.6, yeah, per his request.
Second.
Are we specific enough on that description, or do we need to draw a line on the map, or,
It's 2.5 acres.
2.5?
Yes.
Sorry, Vice Chair. Is that sufficient?
Yeah, Exhibit A.
Okay. All right. Okay, so we've got a motion to basically remove the historic zoning on the 2.5 acres front part. Did we get a second? Commissioner Huber has seconded that motion. Commissioner Huber, would you like to speak? Okay, Commissioner Shelso.
Yeah, I'd vote against this and be in support of planned commercial.
Okay. All right, so let's vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Motion carries 10-2. Is that right, Mr. Diarmond? 10-3, sorry. 9-3.
Numbers.
Just 9 to 5 and then break out in song.
All right. Motion carries. Agenda item 26, applicant Arsip Orbit, location southeast side of Bob Gray Road, west side of Pellissippi Parkway, 9.77 acres. Present zoning is business and technology park and technology overlay. Zoning requested, plan residential and technology overlay, existing land use, agricultural, forestry, vacant land. Density proposed 12 dwelling units per acre. Staff recommendation is to approve the planned residential zone up to 12 dwelling units per acre because it is consistent with the sector plan and surrounding development, subject to the one noted condition. Is the applicant present? All right, do we have opposition? Yes. Okay. Would you like to proceed or defer?
I'll defer.
Okay. All right. Would y'all like to speak?
Good afternoon. My name is Beth Quinley. My address is 1048 Blinken Street. I live in the community to the south, and I'm the HOA president. They're speaking on behalf of my HOA. Just a couple of quick items, nothing major. First, the notifications were not posted. As it states in the documentation that we received online, the 12F24RZ, it states that it has to be placed in the most traveled area, the notification of the rezoning. As well, the address on the application is actually Pellissippi, but the notifications were placed on Bob Gray. It said that this could be done if the planning staff recommended a preferred area for these to be posted, but I didn't see that in the application. Secondly, for our community, there is something called a stub out that's recommended. We would just like to know where that stub out would be connected to our community, as we have private roads right now. And of course, the way you can see the residents set up there, if you put a stub out through the middle, would we then have to drive out onto Bob Gray after you close our access to Pellissippi through their community? You know, that opens their community to our community, which if it's like us, condos or things along those lines, we're not objecting to that. We're just wondering, as private streets, does that mean also that Knox County would take over our streets as they opened it up to a public zoning almost by opening it up to this other community? Sorry, this is my first one of these, so I
That's
don't
okay.
know.
That's all right. We'll
have a couple
we'll
of
have staff
questions.
address that.
Okay, and then we do have right in the front, and when you come in to our community, to the front to the right, there is a very large dip. And when it rains, it floods quite a few feet. So if you're going to take away that forested area right there, it would also cause extra drain off for us in that area. And to be honest, the infrastructure there is crumbling and old at best. We just ask that be addressed so it doesn't cause extra damage to that area in our community, as it is just common, one of the only places we have common lots. Lastly, we would like to know what type of structures they're going to be putting on this. Our pool is right there, so we wouldn't want massive apartment complexes where people could just sit and look down on us at our pool, like I'm sure you wouldn't like your neighbors to do. You know, we know we don't control the fate of this property, but we're asking that it does fall in line with the houses and the community that it's going to be around. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Melanie Davis. I'm an attorney in Maryville, and I represent the Parkway Heights Property Owners Association. That's the same neighborhood that Beth was just talking about. We are asking for additional time, 30 days or 60 days. We would like to look at some of the issues involving the property. The notice was not actually given to many of these residents until last week because of where it was placed, and apparently only 2 people got postcards. There are a number of people in this community who would like to participate in this process, but who didn't feel like they have enough notice and haven't had enough time to look at the issues presented, particularly with the roads issue. This property, since its inception, accesses directly off of Pellissippi Parkway. Parkway Heights does, that's Odin Street. They would never allow that now, but apparently at the time that was done, Pellissippi Parkway was not yet an interstate. So they have what I think is a rather advantageous exclusive access on and off of Pellissippi Parkway. If this happens as proposed, we understand that TDOT has said that they would like to close our access and instead make us go through the new development and access at Bob Gray Road. And that's a very significant change that my clients are being asked to make in response to this change in zoning and change in use of the vacant property above them. We would like to have the opportunity to hire an independent traffic study engineer to look at that and to look at what the impact would be of taking away that private access. How would you deal with all of that traffic going up on Bob Gray Road? I don't think there's a signal there now. And we don't know exactly what is proposed as far as the number of units, but it would go to 12 units per acre. So it's quite a few units in addition to what we already have. And the major impact of this rezoning and a major impact of this development of this property is really on Parkway Heights, because that fundamental issue of access is really apparently going to be affected, because the documents mention the TDOT closing of the access off of Pellissippi and the stud road that's going to be required for us to access a different direction. We just need time to look at that. That's very serious for us, something that we're having to look at only because of what our neighbors are proposing to do. So we understand that ultimately you may look at rezoning this property. They have a right to use their property. I think Beth was very clear about that, but we just want to understand how it's going to affect us, and we'd like to have the time to get professional help to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Hello, Katie Wozek. I work for, 4334 Paper Mill Drive. I work for Batson Himes. We're the engineer. This, of course, is just a rezoning, but I'm here representing the owner as well. They had a lot of questions, I guess, that are maybe not directed at me, but I can try to answer some of them. I would just like to say that we are in agreement with staff recommendation. One of those recommendations is a stub out to Parkway Heights. I was not really informed about like the closure of Odin Street. I guess it's kind of like a separate issue from our rezoning, but with the 12 dwelling units per acre, we don't have any like layouts or anything currently. So because we are requesting the PR zone, we will have to come back to this body with like a concept plan to get approved. So the rezoning is just kind of to even get to that point. We can't really, it doesn't make sense to do a concept and everything if the property isn't going to be rezoned. But that is something, we're going to look at how best to serve the Parkway Heights neighborhood, that, connecting the two based on what TDOT and the county is recommending will require some, conversations and things like that. The access, as recommended, I think will be from Bob Gray, so not off the interstate as discussed. Things like traffic studies, and I know that they had mentioned that's kind of based off of things we propose. So a traffic study might be required like at the concept stage when you're seeing like just how many people or how many lots or houses that we are proposing, and then you kind of go from there. So these are all things that I think we can definitely talk more about after the rezoning and once we get into like a conceptual design. But since this is just rezoning, I can't really address most of those until we do a layout and hear from staff how they feel about the concept plan.
Thank you. All right, Commissioner Smith.
Question for, I guess, the county engineering. Have you all heard some of the concerns from the neighbors about TDOT wanting to close off that section and move it to Bob Gray? And if so, what does that do to the private roads that are currently there? Do those become public or do they remain private?
I think they would remain private. And yes, TDOT in the mobility plan does have Pellissippi Parkway becoming access control. So it is their wishes that this access be closed and for us to seek an alternate entrance for them. And I think this would provide that opportunity.
And to the opposition, I'm just thinking through timelines right this second. Thinking through a 30-day postponement as you propose, I don't know what you could get accomplished in 30 days with the holidays and everything right around the corner. I mean, that's pretty aggressive considering the holidays and all of that stuff. So I guess the question is, if we were to approve what's before us today, it doesn't do anything except change zoning. That still gives you time to do your own independent traffic studies and all of that stuff for us to consider once we see more of the concept plan from what they're wanting to do, to see how that impacts you all, what they're proposing. But what we would do today doesn't actually negatively impact you right off the bat.
Not directly, but I think what we could look at, if we had time, which we haven't had, is what is current zoning versus what is proposed as far as the 12 units per acre zoning as far as impact of traffic and impact of the roads. I think that what they're proposing is a bigger impact than what is currently zoned as far as number of trips per day and that type of thing. So we're just asking for the time to look at that and see if that might affect the rezoning issue.
Commissioner Huber.
I think Vice Chair Hooton might be wanting to speak as well. I think you might have had your light on. That doesn't.
Yeah, he didn't recognize me.
Commissioner Huber.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to echo too that yeah, it's a planned residential, it's a planned zone. And that's really what we're here today to talk about, not necessarily the development plan or what's going to happen with the property. The property at Parkway Heights is already zoned planned residential at 12 units an acre. So it's the same exact zoning that you guys have in your complex now. It's zoned business park. I would think that would almost be more disruptive than anything else that could go in planned residential. I mean, you're talking about office buildings that could be unknown height, that type of thing. So, I mean, not trying to rush it because I agree with Commissioner Smith that a lot of these answers and questions will come out over time, but the time to address those is during the review stage of the planning portion of it. So that being said, I'd like to make a motion to approve PR planned residential zone up to 12 units an acre because it is consistent with the sector plan and surrounding development subject to one condition.
Second.
We've got a motion to approve per staff recommendation by Commissioner Huber, seconded by Vice Chair Hooton. Vice Chair Hooton, you are recognized and you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair.
Objection.
I think we're all pretty clear on what's going on. I just want to make sure that the county is prepared with TDOT to not hold up whatever's going on with this developer. I mean, obviously it's giving everybody an opportunity to do this, but I really think that we need to be a little careful about penalizing this new developer. And I said it at the agenda review meeting, penalizing the new developer to take on an additional 12 per the acre going through their property that they don't really have control of, that they're being forced to accommodate. Any additional improvements, beyond what their 12 would be on Bob Gray need to be accommodated a different way. And, whether or not they're going to have to do bigger stub roads to accommodate that traffic or sidewalks or, any of those things that they might have to do. I can't imagine. It's definitely better than Pellissippi Parkway access, no doubt. But I can't imagine how you're going to be able to accommodate all those units coming out on Bob Gray with that bridge abutment and that tight, area right there. So, I think that, I would do a deep dive with the engineer before any concept plans come before us, and just make sure everybody's on the same page with those improvements and what it's going to take and who's going to pay for what. And the last thing I want to make sure I asked was on the existing development, it looks like there's a hammerhead built where all those units are around it, but it does look like there was an private access taken all the way over. And I just want to make sure that that is the case, that there is a paper access all the way over. Is that common area, or was there a stub out on the current development side? Yeah, you can see.
Our understanding, that's private property. We're zoned as PUDs, so that's not a like our, I guess, community area. The only two we have is that front ditch that I mentioned that we call the lake and the pool. The rest of the property lines you're seeing there are owned by an individual.
So that, you may have to deal with some condemnation there, I guess is what I'm getting at, to force somebody to, yeah.
I mean, that's not my property, thank God, but
All right.
I can't speak to what you all will end up
Okay.
planning to do with that. I do know that if you have all the cars come up that way, it will be a very
We're good.
different feel to that person's life.
Thank you very much. All right. So we're good. Motion
Okay.
second.
All right. Mr. Reynolds?
Yes, thank you. Just to clarify with that private right-of-way, it is a private right-of-way. It does go to the property line, so it's not a lot or owned privately outside of the HOA. And just want to clarify, so the condition to require the stub out is really to provide options in the future. So the intent isn't to require this developer to make that connection because there's a stream, there's a steep slope involved in making those connections. The intent is to provide that option if there's really no other great option to provide access for this. The options are running out for this development to have alternative access other than Pennsylvania Parkway. And yes, we will need to consider how that might work with this future development, but the intent isn't necessarily for them to physically make that. At least that's not what I've discussed so far with other staff. So,
Commissioner Biggs?
I just noticed on the KGIS, it looks like Boyington Road to the kind of immediate west of the parcel also has a direct abutment. So if you go north there to the lot, and was curious if that was considered as another potential access point. I know it goes into a residential neighborhood, but just curious if staff considered that, or if that's kind of a non-starter as well.
again, I think that would be a development plan, like the next stage, we would look at all the options there.
Commissioner Higgins?
In an effort to avoid potentially wasted resources and hurt relationships between neighbors, I want to mention to the neighbors that if there are going to be changes going in here required by TDOT, I think that if TDOT is saying that your all's access has to be removed and you have to go through here, that's as someone pointed out, that's as much a burden on the development to your north as it is for you all. So I would encourage working together, moving forward as they move into the next phase, which would be the planning phase, since this is just the rezoning. And then I also, because there was some mention about the notifications, want to direct a question to staff and or legal just to make sure that there's no, misunderstandings that maybe something was done incorrectly, and clarify that everything notification-wise was done properly in this case.
Isn't that just?
My understanding is that the notification was done correctly. I mean, we can double check our postcards that we send out, but again, the main legal requirement, the only legal requirement for notification is in a newspaper of general circulation. In terms of posting of the sign, and Whitney can correct me, but I don't think that would want our staff stopping along Pellissippi Parkway to post. Also, that would be right away. So, posting on Bob Gray is something that we would have recommended. Is that where the sign was posted? Is that correct?
It was
Yes,
on
it's
Bob Gray.
Yeah.
I understand. I just wanted to make sure because if there was a chance that a delay or thought that a delay might be able to be brought about through other means related to that, just get it out there on the record. So, all right.
Commissioner Biggs? Okay. Mr. Reynolds? All right, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. That's it, right? That's it. We are adjourned.